Hello, and welcome back. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Find a comfortable space, a place where you can feel the weight of the day begin to lift from your shoulders. Tonight, we're going to venture into a place where biology, folklore, and one of the most beloved stories of our time all meet. We're going to talk about a plant so famous it needs no introduction, yet so misunderstood that it feels like we're meeting it for the first time. We are going to talk about the Mandrake. If you're enjoying our time together, and only if it feels right, do consider gently tapping the like button or perhaps subscribing to our little community here. It's a quiet way of letting me know that these stories are finding a home with you. And if you feel like sharing, I'd love to know, what's a plant, real or fictional, that captured your imagination when you were younger? For me, there were so many, but the one we're discussing tonight has held a special fascination for a very long time. Now though, let the outside world fade away. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Settle into your bed and let your pillow cradle your head. Take a soft, slow breath in and let it go. We're about to step into the humid, earthy air of a magical greenhouse to find the real and perhaps even more wondrous story of the screaming root. Chapter 1. The Mandragora of Hogwarts, Deconstructing a Modern Myth. Let's begin our journey in a place familiar to millions, a place built of glass and filled with the scent of damp soil and strange magical blossoms. Let's go to the Hogwarts greenhouses, specifically greenhouse number 3. Can you picture it? The condensation tracing lazy paths down the glass panes. The air thick and warm, a living thing in itself. The long wooden tables, scarred and stained from years of potting and repotting, of spilled potions and trimmed vines. It is here that we get our first definitive modern look at the Mandrake, or as it's known in the wizarding world, the Mandragora. The scene is so masterfully constructed, a perfect blend of the mundane and the magical. We see second-year students, children really, gathered around Professor Pomona Sprout. She's earthy, kind, practical. She's a gardener, first and foremost. And like any good gardener, she is about to teach a lesson in handling a particularly difficult and dangerous plant. The first instruction is not about soil or water or sunlight. It's about protection. She hands out fluffy pink earmuffs. This small detail is the anchor of the entire myth. It's the first signal that we are dealing with something that defies the normal rules of botany. Plants are silent. They are passive. They are to us a quiet form of life. But not this one. This one, we are told, has a voice, and its voice is fatal. The students, with a mix of apprehension and excitement, secure the earmuffs. The silence that follows is a beautiful piece of storytelling. The world is muted. All they can hear is the muffled thumping of their own heartbeats, a sound that only amplifies the tension in the room. Professor Sprout, her own ears protected, demonstrates. She grasps the leafy tuft of the plant firmly, and she pulls. What comes out of the pot is not just a root, it is a shock. It is the perfect visceral embodiment of the uncanny valley. It is a small, gnarled, vaguely humanoid figure. Its skin is a mottled, earthy green-brown. It has no eyes, but you feel it is aware. Its limbs are stubby, twisted roots, and its mouth is a gaping, silent O of a scream that the students thankfully cannot hear. This creature, this plant baby, is kicking, it is writhing, it is protesting its violent unearthing with a furious and deadly tantrum. The image is startling, comical, and deeply unsettling all at once. J.K. and Rowling, through this scene, didn't just describe a magical plant. She tapped into a primal human discomfort, the discomfort of seeing life in a form where we don't expect it. A human shape, a human-like cry, emerging directly from the soil. It blurs the line between the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom, between us and the earth, in a way that is both fascinating and repellent. The properties attributed to it in the story are just as important. The cry of a mature mandrake, we learn, is fatal to anyone who hears it. But the plant is not purely a menace. It is also a powerful restorative. It is the core ingredient in a potion to cure those who have been petrified, turned to stone. It is therefore both a poison and a panacea, a source of death and a key to rebirth. This duality is not an invention for a children's book. It is the very heart of the Mandrake legend, a legend that has echoed through human history for millennia. This single scene, in a book and later a film, did something extraordinary. It took a piece of obscure, deep-seated European folklore, something that had largely faded into dusty old herbals and academic texts, and it resurrected it. It breathed vibrant new life into it, and planted it firmly in the global consciousness of the 21st century. Suddenly, the Mandrake was not just a historical curiosity, it was a pop culture icon. Searches for the word skyrocketed. An entire cottage industry of fan-made art bloomed online, sculptures, drawings, even plush toys of these screaming, leafy babies. In neo-pagan and Wiccan communities, interest in the plant and its historical magical associations saw a significant resurgence. The Hogwarts greenhouse scene was so vivid, so perfectly realized, that it became the definitive image of the Mandrake for a generation. It superseded, in many ways, the thousands of years of history that had come before it. So the question we must ask ourselves, as we stand here in this imaginary greenhouse, is this: how did this happen? How did a story manage to so perfectly capture and redefine such an ancient and powerful myth? The answer is that the story didn't invent the most bizarre parts, it merely polished them. It took the strange, contradictory and terrifying elements of genuine folklore, which were born from a real plant, and it presented them in a package that was irresistible to the modern imagination. The screaming, the human shape, the danger, the healing power, all of these are threads pulled directly from the tapestry of real-world history. To understand the Mandrake of Hogwarts, we must gently tug on those threads and follow them back in time, away from the magic of the wizarding world and into the tangible world of botany, of ancient medicine, and of the profound human tendency to see ourselves reflected in the natural world. So let's leave the greenhouse for now. Let's take off our imaginary earmuffs and allow the sounds of the world to return. And let's begin the real journey, the journey to find the quiet, non-screaming but arguably more incredible plant that started it all. Mandragora officinarum. The real mandrake is a much more humble-looking plant than its fictional counterpart might suggest, at least from above the ground. If you were to walk through its native habitat, the dry, sun-baked soils of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, you might not even notice it. It doesn't grow tall and proud. Instead, it forms a low-lying rosette of leaves, large, dark green, and somewhat coarse, spreading out flat against the ground. They look a bit like the leaves of a tobacco plant, or perhaps a rough, oversized spinach. From the center of this rosette, in the spring, emerge the flowers. They are not showy or dramatic. They are bell-shaped, modest, and depending on the specific species, Mandragora officinarum or Mandragora autumnalis, they can range in color from a pale greenish-white to a delicate violet or purple. They hang their heads, clustered together close to the earth. After the flowers come the fruit, small yellow-orange berries that are often called Satan's apples or love apples. They are sweet-smelling, but dangerously toxic. Everything about the plant that is visible above the soil speaks of modesty, of quiet existence. It is the part of the plant that you cannot see, the part hidden beneath the earth, that holds the secret to its millennia-long fame, the root. To understand the power of the mandrake root, you have to understand its function for the plant. It is a taproot, a primary storage organ designed to keep the plant alive through long, hot, dry summers when the leaves wither away completely. It plunges deep into the earth, sometimes for 3 or 4 feet, seeking out moisture and storing starches and sugars, the energy the plant needs to survive its dormancy and burst forth with new leaves when the autumn rains return. Because it needs to be so large and robust, the taproot often grows thick and fleshy, and as it pushes its way down through the soil, navigating around stones and other obstacles, it will often branch. Sometimes it splits into two main, thick sections. Sometimes it splits into more. And in this simple biological act of branching, the legend is born. The forked root of Mandragora Officinarum can bear an astonishing resemblance to a human figure. One branch becomes a leg, the other branch another leg. Smaller offshoots can look like arms. The thick top of the root where it meets the stem becomes the torso and head. It's not a perfect resemblance, of course. It's abstract, gnarled, and lumpy. But it is undeniably, uncannily humanoid. Nature, in its infinite branching creativity, occasionally produces a shape that looks back at us with a familiar form. We see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, and in the mandrake root, our ancestors saw a small subterranean person. They saw a homunculus, an earth mannequin, and this single powerful visual association became the seed from which an entire forest of folklore would grow. To our modern scientific minds, this is a coincidence. It's a classic case of pareidolia, the same psychological phenomenon that makes us see a man in the moon. But to the pre-scientific mind, this was no coincidence. It was a sign. This brings us to a fascinating and deeply intuitive concept that governed much of ancient and medieval thought, the doctrine of signatures. This was the belief that God, or the creative forces of the universe, had left clues or signatures in the natural world to indicate the purpose of various plants and minerals. A plant shaped like a liver, such as hepatica, was thought to be a remedy for liver ailments. The walnut, with its wrinkled shell resembling a skull, and its nut meat, looking like the two hemispheres of the brain, was believed to be a cure for head injuries and mental illness. It was a form of natural philosophy, an attempt to read the language of nature, and in this symbolic language the mandrake spoke volumes. A root shaped like a human body could mean only one thing. It held immense power over the human body. It was not for a simple cough or a minor ailment. Its power must be profound, touching upon the very essence of human life, fertility, consciousness, health, and perhaps even mortality itself. This belief immediately elevated the mandrake from a simple plant to a thing of immense power and importance. And with great power comes great danger. The human-like form suggested that the plant was not just a passive object, but a being with a spirit, a consciousness of its own. It was a chthonic entity, a creature of the underworld. To pull it from its home in the earth was not simply an act of harvesting, it was an act of violence against a powerful being. And this is where the idea of the scream originates. The scream of the mandrake is not a literal, audible phenomenon. No botanist has ever recorded it. No one in history ever actually heard it. The scream is a metaphor. It is a story, a piece of psychological armor created to encapsulate the very real dangers associated with this plant. It was a warning passed down through generations, made vivid and terrifying to ensure it would never be forgotten. Imagine you are an ancient herbalist or a village wise woman. You know that the mandrake root, when prepared correctly, can be a great blessing. It can ease the unbearable pain of childbirth, calm a raging fever, or allow a surgeon to perform their work on a patient lost in a deep, painless slumber. The plant was, in effect, one of the ancient world's most potent anesthetics and analgesics. The Greek physician Dioscorides, writing in the 1st century AD, described how a wine made from the root could induce a sleep so deep that patients could undergo surgery without feeling a thing. This was not magic, it was pharmacology in its infancy. But you also know that the dosage is critical. A little too much, and the deep sleep becomes a terrifying delirium, filled with hallucinations. A little more, and the sleep becomes permanent. The plant that can save a life can just as easily take one. Furthermore, you know that the plant's psychoactive properties are profound. Even handling it, or accidentally ingesting a small amount, could lead to bizarre and frightening changes in perception. The world could warp and twist, reality could dissolve. This was a plant that could unlock the doors of the mind, but it could also shatter them. How do you communicate this complex danger to ordinary people in a pre-literate society? You don't give them a lecture on alkaloids and neurotransmitters. You give them a story, a myth, a warning they will never ever forget. You tell them that when the mandrake is pulled from the earth, it lets out a shriek so terrible that it will kill any living creature that hears it. This story is a work of pure genius. It accomplishes several things at once. First, it ensures that only the most knowledgeable and serious individuals will dare to harvest the plant. It keeps children and the foolish away. Second, it creates a powerful ritual around the harvesting process, a ritual designed to reinforce the respect and caution needed to handle such a potent substance. Third, and most importantly, the scream becomes a perfect metaphor for the plant's true danger, its silent, deadly toxicity, and its ability to induce a state of mind so altered it could feel like a kind of psychic death. The scream is the sound of a mind being torn from reality by powerful neurotoxins. The historical accounts of the harvesting ritual, described by writers like the Roman Jewish historian Josephus and the Greek philosopher Theophrastus, are a direct consequence of this belief. They read like a scene from a dark fairy tale, but they are rooted in a deep, practical fear. The ritual was to be performed at night, under the cover of darkness, adding to the mystique and sense of transgression. The harvester, the magician or herbalist, would not touch the plant directly at first. Using an iron sword, iron being a metal often thought to ward off spirits, they would trace 3 circles on the ground around the mandrake. This was a magical act of containment, of creating a sacred, protected space between the operator and the powerful entity they were about to disturb. Then came the most famous part of the procedure. The harvester would carefully excavate the soil around the root, loosening it, but never ever pulling it out. They would then take a rope and tie one end securely around the base of the plant's leaves, and the other end around the neck of a dog, most often a black dog, a color long associated with the underworld and magic. The harvester would then retreat to a safe distance, plug their ears with wax or cotton, and offer a piece of meat to the hungry dog, tossing it just out of its reach. The dog, lunging for the food, would pull the rope taut and yank the mandrake root from the ground. In that moment, according to the legend, the root would emit its fatal shriek, killing the unfortunate dog instantly. The harvester, with their ears safely plugged, would survive to claim the now pacified root. It's a grim and dramatic story. It's highly unlikely that it was ever performed exactly as described. The dog, a valuable animal, was more likely a symbolic sacrifice in the story, or perhaps a later embellishment to make the tale even more fearsome. But the core elements, the ritualistic circles, the aversion to pulling it by hand, the need to block one's ears, all point to a profound psychological need to create a buffer between the human and the plant's terrifying power. It was a way of externalizing the danger, of projecting the plant's internal chemical threat into an external supernatural one. The ritual was a form of respect, a recognition that one was meddling with the forces of life and death. To truly understand the source of this fear and respect, we must travel deeper still. We must move past the root's shape, past the folklore, and into the very molecules that make up the mandrake. We need to explore the quiet, invisible world of its biochemistry, for it is here that the real magic of the mandrake resides. The power of Mandragora officinarum comes from a specific class of chemical compounds it produces, known as tropane alkaloids. This is a family of molecules that has a profound and dramatic effect on the human nervous system. The 3 most prominent alkaloids in the mandrake are hyoscyamine, atropine, and, most famously, scopolamine. These names might sound familiar. They are not relics of some forgotten grimoire. They are substances used in modern medicine today, in carefully purified and precisely measured doses. Atropine is used by ophthalmologists to dilate pupils for eye exams and in emergency medicine to treat a slow heart rate. Scopolamine is the active ingredient in motion sickness patches that you might wear on a cruise or a long car ride, but in the raw, variable concentrations found in a wild plant. These compounds are anything but benign. They are potent anticholinergics. To put it simply, they work by blocking the action of a key neurotransmitter in your body called acetylcholine. Think of acetylcholine as one of the body's primary messengers. It's responsible for carrying signals between nerves and muscles, and for regulating a huge number of involuntary bodily functions: your heart rate, your digestion, your salivation, the contraction of your pupils. It's the chemical that keeps the quiet, background hum of your body's machinery running smoothly. When tropane alkaloids enter your system, they are like a master forger creating a million fake keys. They fit into the same locks, the acetylcholine receptors on the surface of your cells, but they don't turn the lock. They just sit there, blocking the real key, acetylcholine, from doing its job. The result is a systemic disruption of your body's internal communication network. The conversation between your nerves and your body begins to break down. The physical effects are immediate and unpleasant. Your mouth becomes painfully dry as saliva production ceases. Your pupils dilate wildly, making light painful and blurring your vision. Your heart rate can become erratic and dangerously fast. Your skin becomes hot and flushed as your body loses its ability to sweat and regulate temperature. These physical symptoms are distressing enough, but it is the effect of these alkaloids on the central nervous system, on the brain itself, that truly explains the mandrake's fearsome reputation. Scopolamine, in particular, is famous for its ability to cross the blood-brain barrier and wreak havoc on perception and consciousness. It can induce a state of profound delirium, a twilight state between waking and dreaming. This is not the colorful, expansive, psychedelic experience one might associate with other plants. It is often described as confusing, disorienting, and terrifying. A person under the influence of a high dose of mandrake alkaloids would not be tripping so much as they would be trapped in a waking nightmare. They would experience vivid hallucinations, but these would not be recognized as hallucinations. They would seem utterly real, blending seamlessly and chaotically with reality. They might hold conversations with people who aren't there, or swat at insects that don't exist. Memory formation is severely impaired, leading to amnesia and a profound sense of dislocation in time and space. The boundary between the self and the outside world dissolves. It is in this state of chemically induced psychosis that we find the true scream of the mandrake. It is the silent scream of a mind that has lost its moorings, adrift in a sea of nonsensical perceptions and terrifying visions. It's the terror of losing control of one's own consciousness. Is it any wonder that a plant capable of producing such a profound and frightening alteration of the mind was believed to be a demonic entity with a fatal cry? The myth was a far simpler and more effective way of conveying the truth of the experience than a chemical explanation ever could be. The folklore was, in its own way, a precise and accurate description of the plant's effect, just written in the language of symbol and story rather than science. As we move from the ancient world into the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the legend of the mandrake only grows, twisting into even more bizarre and elaborate forms. Its association with the human form led to the belief that it was a key ingredient in the creation of a homunculus, an artificial human being, a concept that fascinated alchemists. They believed that the root, carefully tended and fed with blood and other substances, could be nurtured into a fully formed, miniature person who would serve its creator as a loyal familiar. The plant became inextricably linked with witchcraft. It was believed that mandrakes grew only at the foot of gallows, springing from the bodily fluids of a hanged man, a grim piece of folklore that tied the plant directly to a violent death and the restless spirits of the damned. Witches were said to harvest them for use in their flying ointments and other dark concoctions. These ointments were very real, and their effects were a direct result of the tropane alkaloids. When applied to the skin, particularly to mucous membranes, the alkaloids could be absorbed into the bloodstream, inducing the characteristic delirium and hallucinations, which could easily be interpreted as the experience of flying or consorting with spirits. The demand for mandrake roots became so high that a thriving market for counterfeits emerged. Unscrupulous merchants would take the large fleshy roots of a common and harmless plant like the bryony and carve them into more explicitly human-like shapes. They would even insert tiny millet seeds into the face area, which would then sprout into a fine hair-like growth, making the forgery even more convincing. These puppets, as they were called, were sold for exorbitant prices as talismans for protection, fertility, or wealth. The fact that people were willing to risk so much to acquire one, real or fake, speaks to the immense cultural power the plant held. It was not just a medicine, it was a supernatural artifact. Think of the journey this single plant has taken through our collective imagination. It begins as a real organism, Mandragora officinarum, with a unique root shape and a powerful biochemical profile. This reality gives birth to a myth, the myth of the earth mannequin with a deadly scream. This myth in turn generates a set of rituals and beliefs that govern how humans interact with the plant for centuries. These beliefs become entangled with magic, alchemy, and religion, elevating the mandrake to a legendary status. And then, with the dawn of the scientific revolution, the pendulum begins to swing back. We move from folklore to pharmacy. Chemists in the 19th century began to isolate the active compounds from the plant. They named them atropine, after Atropos, the Greek fate who cuts the thread of life, a fitting name for a molecule from such a deadly plant. They studied their chemical structures and their mechanisms of action. What was once a witch's tool, or an alchemist's prize, was now understood. Its power was not supernatural, but chemical. Its effects were not the result of a spirit, but of a molecule blocking a receptor. And with this understanding came control. Scientists could synthesize these molecules in a lab. Doctors could prescribe them in precise, safe, life-saving doses. The very same substance that was once thought to house a shrieking demon is now placed in a tiny clinical patch behind an ear to prevent nausea on a family vacation. The molecule that fueled tales of flying witches is now used to dilate a child's eyes so an optometrist can check their vision. It is a truly humbling journey, a perfect illustration of how science can demystify the world without disenchanting it. The reality of the mandrake, its evolutionary history, its complex biochemistry, its intimate relationship with our own neurochemistry, is in its own way just as wondrous as any of the stories told about it. Which brings us back, full circle, to that greenhouse at Hogwarts. The depiction of the mandrake in Harry Potter is not just a fantasy. It is the culmination of this entire millennia-long story. It is a masterful act of cultural distillation. J.K. Rowling took all the most potent elements of the legend, the humanoid form, the deadly cry, the duality of poison and cure, and wove them seamlessly into her own mythology. She didn't have to invent a new monster, she just had to reintroduce us to a very, very old one. The scene works so well because it resonates with all the latent history that the plant carries with it. It taps into the echoes of the doctrine of signatures, our ancient instinct to find meaning in shape. It plays on the primal fear of a nature that is not passive, a nature that can scream back at us. It captures the essence of the plant's dual role in medicine as both a healer and a killer. The Mandrake of Hogwarts is a living piece of folklore, a direct descendant of the tales told by Dioscorides and the rituals practiced by medieval herbalists. It is the latest chapter in a story that has been co-authored by a plant and by human imagination for thousands of years. It serves as a powerful reminder that the stories we tell are not created in a vacuum. They grow out of the earth, just like the plants they describe. They are rooted in real biology, in real chemistry, and in the timeless, universal human need to make sense of the strange, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying world around us. The enduring myth of the screaming mandrake is not, therefore, a story about a fictional plant. It is a story about us. It's about our relationship with the natural world, our awe at its power, and our attempts to craft stories that can contain and explain that power. The real mandrake does not scream with its voice, but through its history, its chemistry, and its uncanny resemblance to ourselves, it speaks volumes. And for generations, we have been leaning in, listening to its strange and captivating tale. Chapter 2. The Forked Man. Botany, Chemistry, and Toxicity. And so we lean in, we quiet our minds, and we begin to listen not to the scream of legend, but to the slow, deep, and intricate story the plant itself is telling. It's a story told not in sound, but in structure, in chemistry, in the very way it has chosen to exist in the world. To understand the mandrake, we must first learn its language, and its language is botany. Let's begin by placing it in its family. We all have a family, a network of relations that helps to define who we are. Plants are no different. The mandrake, or Mandragora officinarum, belongs to a vast and rather notorious clan, the Solanaceae, more commonly known as the Nightshades, and it is a family of profound contradictions, a family of saints and sinners. On one hand, this family gives us some of the most familiar and comforting foods on our tables: the humble potato, the rich and life-giving tomato, the glossy eggplant, the sweet and vibrant pepper. These are the wholesome, dependable cousins, the ones who bring nourishment and joy to the family gathering. But every family has its other side, its darker, more complicated relatives, the ones who live on the edge, and the Nightshade family is famous for them. This is the family of Belladonna, the beautiful lady, whose berries are like drops of polished jet, capable of stealing the light from one's eyes. It's the family of henbane, with its sticky, hairy leaves and ghostly purple-veined flowers. The family of the datura, the moonflower, whose colossal trumpet-shaped blooms unfurl only in the twilight, releasing a scent that is at once intoxicating and unsettling, a sweet perfume that carries a warning. These plants are the master chemists of the botanical world. They are the family's alchemists, spending their slow, sun-drenched lives patiently assembling some of the most complex and potent molecules known to nature. And the mandrake Mandragora is right there among them, a key member of this shadowy council. It shares their chemical genius, their ability to speak directly to the nervous systems of animals, including our own. So let's travel, in our minds, to where this quiet storyteller makes its home. We find ourselves not in a dark, enchanted forest of folklore, but under the warm, clarifying sun of the Mediterranean. Imagine the landscape of southern Europe, of North Africa, of the Levant. The air is dry and warm, scented with wild thyme and dust. The soil is often rocky, unforgiving, baked by a sun that can be relentless. This is not the rich, damp loam of a fairy tale wood. This is a place of resilience, a place where life has to be tough, clever, and deeply rooted to survive. And it is here, in these sun-drenched stony fields and waysides, that the mandrake lives its humble, ground-hugging life. If you were to walk by, you might not even notice it. It doesn't aspire to the sky like a tree or shout for attention with flamboyant petals like an orchid. For most of the year, it is a simple, unassuming rosette of leaves. Imagine a cluster of broad, dark green leaves, somewhat like those of a tobacco plant or a coarse spinach. They are often wrinkled, with a rough, slightly hairy texture, and they spread out flat against the earth, as if trying to capture every possible photon of sunlight while staying low, out of the wind and away from the mouths of grazing animals. There is a sturdiness to them, a leathery persistence. They speak of a life spent conserving water and enduring heat. In the spring, it will offer a quiet and understated gift. From the center of this rosette of leaves, nestled low to the ground, a cluster of flowers will emerge. They are bell-shaped, and their color can range from a pale greenish-white to a deeper, more evocative violet blue. They are not dramatic. They are shy, their heads often nodding down toward the earth, as if whispering secrets to the soil. If you were to get close, you would find they have a faint, strange, and slightly sweet scent. It's a quiet announcement of its presence to the pollinators that hum and buzz through the warm air. After the flowers fade, they are replaced by the fruit. Small, round berries, about the size of a marble or a small plum. They begin as a hard, unripe green, but as the summer sun works its magic, they ripen to a soft, inviting yellow or a blushing orange-red. They are called devil's apples or love apples in some traditions, and they have a distinct heady and sweet aroma. It is a scent that is both fruity and strangely medicinal, a perfume that hints at the potent chemistry held within. It's an invitation and a warning all at once. But all of this, The leaves, the flowers, the fruit is just the visible part of the story. It is the preface, the real narrative, the part of the plant that has so thoroughly captivated and terrified the human imagination lies hidden. It lives its life in the dark, silent world beneath the surface of the soil. We are talking, of course, about the root. To truly understand it, we must imagine ourselves digging carefully into that dry, compacted Mediterranean earth. The soil is warm and granular, giving way slowly, and as we clear it away, we begin to reveal a form that is utterly arresting. It is not the fibrous, sprawling network of roots you might find on a grass, nor is it the simple single taproot of a carrot. The mandrake root is a taproot, yes, but it is one with a profound and uncanny characteristic. It is thick, fleshy, and often, almost unnervingly, bifurcated. It forks. It splits into two or more distinct fleshy limbs, tapering down into the darkness. The surface of the root is rough, wrinkled, and typically a brownish yellow, the color of old parchment or parsnip. It can grow to a remarkable size, sometimes several feet long, a testament to the years it has spent slowly, patiently delving deeper into the earth, seeking out water and nutrients. And in its shape, in its forked form, our human brain, a master of pattern recognition, cannot help but see a familiar figure. We see a torso, we see legs. Sometimes, smaller rootlets branch off from the top, suggesting arms. We see, in the earth, a small twisted earthen person, a homunculus. This is not a metaphor we are imposing. It is a direct and powerful visual impression. For millennia, people digging this plant from the ground have been confronted with this subterranean doll, this little forked man or woman of the soil. And this single botanical feature is the seed crystal around which all the legends have formed. The plant doesn't just contain powerful magic, it looks like a magical being. Its very form is an invitation to storytelling. It's a botanical Rorschach test, and humanity has consistently seen a reflection of itself looking back from the dark earth. And if its form is its body, then its chemistry is its voice. This is how it truly interacts with the world, how it defends itself, how it ensures its survival, and how, when we encounter it, it speaks directly to our own biology. We now move from the visible architecture of the plant to the invisible architecture of its molecules. We delve into the world of alkaloids. Think of alkaloids as a plant's specialized vocabulary. Most of the chemistry in a plant is for its day-to-day living: photosynthesis, building cell walls, storing energy. This is its basic grammar, but the alkaloids are its poetry, its threats, its promises, its spells. They are complex nitrogen-containing compounds that plants create for very specific purposes, usually for defense. They are the chemical equivalent of thorns, or bitter tastes, or poisons. They are a message to any insect or animal that might try to eat the plant, and the message is simple: do not. The mandrake, being a prominent member of the Nightshade family, is an exceptionally fluent speaker of this chemical language. Its root, in particular, is a living library of potent tropane alkaloids. This is a specific class of chemical compounds, and they are the active ingredients, the very source of the mandrake's power over our bodies and minds. While there are many, we will focus on the three most important and powerful figures in this chemical story: atropine, scopolamine, and hyoscyamine. Imagine these molecules as exquisitely crafted keys. Nature, the blind but brilliant locksmith, has spent millions of years of trial and error forging these keys. They are not large molecules, but their three-dimensional shape is incredibly specific. They are built around a peculiar two-ringed structure, the tropane ring, which gives them a precise, rigid architecture. This shape is not an accident. It has been refined for a single purpose, to fit perfectly into a very specific set of locks within the nervous systems of animals. Our nervous system is a communications network of staggering complexity. It's how our brain talks to our body, and how our body talks back. It's how we think, feel, move, and perceive the world. This communication happens through chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Think of them as tiny couriers, carrying instructions from one nerve cell to the next. They are released from one cell, travel across a microscopic gap called a synapse, and then dock into a specific receptor on the next cell, like a ship coming into its designated port. When the messenger docks, it delivers its instruction: contract, relax, secrete, fire. One of the most important of these chemical couriers is a molecule called acetylcholine. It is fundamental. Acetylcholine is the messenger for what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the rest and digest system. It's the calm, steady hand on the tiller of our physiology. It's what slows our heart down when we're relaxed. It's what tells our glands to produce saliva so we can digest our food. It tells the pupils of our eyes to constrict in bright light, and the tiny muscles in our eyes to contract so we can focus on things up close. It manages the quiet, automatic, life-sustaining functions of the body. The locks that acetylcholine fits into are called acetylcholine receptors, and the tropane alkaloids from the mandrake, atropine, and scopolamine are master forgers. They have crafted molecular keys that are almost identical in shape to our own acetylcholine. So when someone ingests mandrake root, these alkaloids enter the bloodstream and spread throughout the body. They arrive at the same nerve endings where acetylcholine is meant to deliver its calm and steadying messages, and they fit perfectly into the acetylcholine receptors. They slide into the locks, but here is the crucial and dangerous detail. They are imposter keys. They fit in the lock, but they do not turn it. They simply sit there, blocking the keyhole. And because the lock is occupied by the imposter, the real messenger, acetylcholine, cannot get in. It arrives with its vital instructions: slow the heart, produce saliva, constrict the pupil, but the port is blocked. The message is never delivered. And so, the entire rest and digest system begins to shut down. This is not a subtle effect. It is a profound and systemic disruption of the body's baseline state of being. It is the scientific reality behind the mandrake's poison. Let's walk through the experience, system by system, as the voice of the plant begins to speak to the body. The first signs are often a profound dryness. The glands that produce saliva and sweat are under the control of acetylcholine. With their receptors blocked, the message to produce moisture is never received. The mouth becomes parched, cottony, what doctors call dry as a bone. The skin becomes hot, flushed, and strangely dry to the touch, even in a warm room. The body has lost its ability to cool itself through perspiration. Then come the effects on the eyes. The iris, the colored part of your eye, is a muscle that controls the size of your pupil. In bright light, acetylcholine tells it to constrict, making the pupil smaller to protect the retina. The mandrake alkaloids block this command. The muscle relaxes completely, and the pupil dilates, widening until it is a vast black pool. This is the effect for which its cousin belladonna was named. Women in Renaissance Italy would use drops from the plant to dilate their pupils, a look that was considered beautiful and alluring. But the cost is vision. With the pupils wide open, the eye is overwhelmed with light, causing extreme sensitivity and blurring. But it goes deeper. The ability to focus your vision on near objects also relies on acetylcholine contracting a tiny muscle in the eye. That too is paralyzed. The world dissolves into an unfocused haze. You can see things at a distance, perhaps, but anything close, a book, a face, becomes impossible to resolve. The world is suddenly bright, blurry, and distant. Meanwhile, in the chest, the heart is beginning to race. Our heart has its own internal pacemaker, but it is constantly being told to slow down, to keep a calm and steady rhythm by a major nerve called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve uses acetylcholine to deliver this calming message. When atropine blocks those receptors on the heart, the brake line is cut. The heart, freed from its restraining influence, begins to beat faster and faster, a condition known as tachycardia. A deep, unsettling drumming begins inside the chest. All of these physiological effects are profound and disorienting. A hot, dry body, a racing heart, a blurry and overbright world. But the most famous and most terrifying effects of the mandrake take place within the mind. Our brain is a universe of acetylcholine receptors. They are crucial for memory, for learning, for attention, for maintaining a coherent thread of consciousness. And when scopolamine and atropine flood these receptors in the brain, they unleash a state that is not simply hallucinatory, it is a true delirium. This is a critical distinction. A classic psychedelic, like psilocybin, might dissolve the ego and show you the interconnectedness of the universe, but you often retain a core awareness that you are in an altered state. A deliriant is different. Scopolamine, in particular, is a master of dissolving the boundary between reality and hallucination. It doesn't just show you strange things, it makes you inhabit a completely fabricated reality, and you are utterly 100% convinced that it is real. The conscious mind becomes unmoored. Short-term memory is obliterated. You might begin a sentence and forget how it started. You might walk into a room and have no idea why you are there. The stream of consciousness breaks apart into a series of disconnected, confusing moments. This profound confusion is then populated by hallucinations of the most mundane and believable kind. People will have lengthy, detailed, and perfectly normal conversations with friends, family members, or strangers who are simply not there. They will see objects that are not present and interact with them. They might try to smoke a cigarette that doesn't exist, or swat at insects that are merely phantoms of a disordered mind. This is the twilight sleep that scopolamine was once used for in childbirth, a state of profound amnesia and detachment. And it is the core of the madness described in so many historical accounts of mandrake poisoning. The victim is not seeing cosmic patterns, they are trapped in a waking dream, a bizarre and nonsensical private theatre, and they are not the audience, they are the lead actor with no script and no memory of the previous scene. It is this property, particularly of scopolamine, which is readily absorbed through the skin, that likely gave rise to the legends of witches' flying ointments. These were salves, often made with a base of fat and a cocktail of nightshade plants like mandrake, belladonna, and henbane. When applied to the skin, the tropane alkaloids would be absorbed into the bloodstream. They would likely not achieve a lethal dose, but they could certainly achieve a psychoactive one. The resulting experience would be a powerful delirium, a deep, dreamlike trance. And in this state, the sensation of disembodiment, of floating or flying, is a commonly reported effect. The witch was not physically flying through the sky on a broomstick, she was flying through the landscapes of her own mind, propelled by the potent chemistry of these remarkable plants. Herein lies the profound power of the mandrake. It is a perfect convergence of form and function. Its root takes on the uncanny form of a human being, a little person pulled from the earth, and its chemistry, when ingested, attacks the very systems in our brain that manage memory and perception, causing us to see and interact with phantom human beings. The plant that looks like a person makes you see people who are not there. It's almost too poetic to be a coincidence. The line between medicine and poison is, and always has been, one of dosage. The very same atropine that can cause a terrifying delirium is a cornerstone of modern medicine. It is used in emergency rooms to restart a heart that has stopped. It is used by ophthalmologists to dilate the pupils for eye exams. The same scopolamine that fuels nightmares of phantom conversations is used in a simple transdermal patch to prevent motion sickness on a cruise ship. Nature does not create poisons or medicines. It creates tools for survival. It creates a chemical language. The mandrake, in its quiet, sun-drenched field, is not evil. It is not magical in the way of fiction. It is a master engineer, a patient chemist that has, over eons, perfected a set of molecules to defend itself. It has developed a powerful voice to say, "Leave me be." But we, in our infinite curiosity and our relentless search for meaning, for power, for relief from our ailments, have leaned in close to listen. We tasted its fruit, we dug up its human-shaped root, and we experienced firsthand the profound and terrifying power of its chemical speech. We felt our bodies flush, our hearts race, and our minds uncouple from the shared world. And in that experience of delirium, born from the verifiable interaction of specific molecules with specific neural receptors, we found the rational kernel for 1,000 years of myth. The scream was never real, but the power that made us imagine it was very real indeed. It was simply the sound of our own nervous system, thrown into beautiful, terrifying chaos by the forked man of the soil. Chapter 3. Whispers from Antiquity. The root of gods, healers and sorcerers. And so we pull back from that intimate internal chaos. We float up and out from the landscape of our own neurons, leaving behind the dizzying echo of a scream that was never truly there. The forked man of the soil has done its work, speaking to us in a chemical language we are only just beginning to translate. But before the spectroscope, before the laboratory, before the very concept of the molecule, humanity had to listen to that language with its heart and its gut. It had to build a story around this profound and unsettling power, a story that began not with science but with awe and with fear. To find the beginning of that story, we must let the world of our present moment grow soft and distant. We must travel back, not just a few centuries but millennia, to a time when the lands around the Mediterranean were the cradle of Western thought, and the line between a medicine, a poison, and a prayer was as thin as a single trembling leaf. We are going to the ancient world, to walk through the pharmacies of pharaohs and the gardens of Greek philosophers, to find the first written words, the first recorded encounters with Mandragora. Our journey begins under the relentless, bleaching sun of ancient Egypt, a civilization built along the fertile artery of the Nile. Here, in a world of sandstone temples and breathtakingly complex bureaucracy, medicine was an intricate tapestry woven from practical observation, divine invocation, and magical rite. And it is here, in one of the most remarkable documents ever recovered from the ancient world, that we find one of our earliest credible whispers of the Mandrake. We are looking at a copy, of course, a scroll of papyrus purchased in a Luxor marketplace in the winter of 1873 by the German Egyptologist Georg Ebers. But the text it preserves is far older, dating back to around 1550 BCE, during the reign of Amenhotep I. It is called, appropriately, the Ebers Papyrus. To unroll this document is to open a window into the mind of an Egyptian physician. It is over 20 meters long, a veritable library of remedies, a detailed formulary containing over 700 magical spells and medical recipes for everything from crocodile bites to the alignment of the heart. It is a profoundly practical document, and within its careful hieratic script, among remedies involving honey, myrrh, and juniper berries, we find prescriptions calling for a plant known as daya, based on the context of its use as a pain reliever and a sedative and its later associations in the region. Many scholars believe this to be none other than our Mandrake. Imagine a physician priest, his head shaved, his white linen robes immaculate against the dust of Thebes. He is preparing a poultice for a builder who has fallen from a scaffold, his leg fractured and swollen. The patient's groans fill the small, cool room. The physician doesn't have the language of alkaloids or central nervous system depressants, but he has something just as powerful, tradition. He knows, through generations of trial and error, that the root of this particular plant, when ground with beer and honey and applied to the site of the pain, brings a quietness. It brings a stillness, not just to the body, but to the mind. He crushes the root on a stone pallet, the earthy, slightly sweet scent filling the air. He sees its forked, vaguely human shape. To him, this is not a coincidence. This is a sign, a signature from the gods themselves, indicating the plant's purpose. It is shaped like a little person, and it has power over the pain of a person. The logic is simple, elegant, and deeply human. In the Ebers Papyrus, the Mandrake is not yet a creature of terror. It is simply a tool, a gift of the earth, one of many instruments in a healer's quest to mediate between the living and the suffering that afflicts them. It is a whisper of the power to come, a quiet first chord in a symphony of myth and medicine that would soon swell to consume the entire Mediterranean world. From the sun-baked banks of the Nile, we drift east, into the Levant, into the world of the Old Testament. Here the mandrake sheds its purely medicinal cloak and steps into the vibrant, chaotic world of human desire. In the book of Genesis, it appears in a poignant story of domestic struggle between the two wives of Jacob, Leah and Rachel. Rachel, who is barren, sees Leah's son Reuben return from the fields with mandrakes, known in Hebrew as dudaim. The name itself is telling, likely derived from the word dod, meaning love or beloved. The plant is already inextricably linked with fertility and passion. Rachel, desperate for a child, bargains with her sister for the roots. It is a moment of raw human drama, and at its center is this unassuming plant. It is treated as a known and powerful commodity, an aphrodisiac, and a fertility aid so potent that a night with a shared husband is a fair price for it. Later, in the exquisite poetry of the Song of Solomon, a book that is a celebration of romantic and sensual love, we hear the line, "The mandrakes send out their fragrance, and at our door is every delicacy." Here the mandrake is not a medicine, but part of a sensory tapestry of love. It is an element of atmosphere, its scent mingling with the pomegranates and the henna blossoms. It sets a scene of intimacy and longing. What these ancient texts show us is that long before the Greeks began to catalogue the world with rigorous logic, the mandrake had already established its dual identity. It was a quieter of pain in Egypt, a stoker of passion in ancient Israel. It was a plant that operated on the most fundamental axes of human experience, pain and pleasure, suffering and desire, life and the creation of new life. Its human shape was not a mere curiosity, it was a profound statement. It seemed to embody the very essence of humanity in its earthy form. It held up a mirror to our own bodies and our deepest, most primal urges. And as this reputation spread, as traders' caravans and sailors' ships carried tales of the love apple of the Levant and the pain eater of Egypt across the sea, it was destined to arrive in a land where the human mind was undergoing a revolution, a place where observation was about to become a science, ancient Greece. Imagine the world through the eyes of a curious Greek in the 4th century BCE. The gods still dwelt on Olympus, and dryads still whispered in the trees, but something new was stirring. It was an insatiable desire not just to accept the world, but to understand it, to name it, to categorize it, to find the patterns and principles that governed the blooming of a flower and the falling of a star. This was the world of Aristotle, a world where philosophy was becoming the mother of science. And it was one of Aristotle's own students, a man from the island of Lesbos named Theophrastus, who would turn this new systematic gaze upon the world of plants. Theophrastus is rightly called the father of botany. His work, Historia Plantarum, or Enquiry into Plants, was nothing less than a foundational act of intellectual courage. For the first time, someone was attempting to describe and classify the entire known plant kingdom based on its structure and reproduction, not just its use to humans. He was a true naturalist, walking through the groves and fields, observing, taking notes, and talking to the people who knew the plants best, the rhizotomoi, the root cutters. These were the herbalists and folk healers of their day, the ones who knew from practical, often dangerous experience which plants could heal and which could harm. And when Theophrastus writes about the mandrake, something fascinating happens. The keen observing scientist and the careful transcriber of folklore become one. He describes the plant with a botanist's eye, the leaves, like those of a lettuce, the purplish flower, the yellow sweet-smelling fruit, the two main roots that give it its distinctive shape. He notes its powerful soporific effects, stating plainly that the leaf, when steeped, is a gentle sleep aid, while the root is a much more potent, even dangerous narcotic. This is the scientist at work. But then, he relays the stories told to him by the root cutters, and we see the birth of the magical tradition in writing. He says that when harvesting the mandrake, one must draw 3 circles around the plant with a sword and cut it while facing west. He adds that another person should dance around it and say as many things as possible about the mysteries of love. Let's pause here and feel the weight of this moment. This isn't just a quirky anecdote. It is a psychological portrait of humanity's relationship with a powerful substance. Why the circles with a sword? It's an act of demarcation, of creating a sacred, or perhaps a contained space. It's an acknowledgement that you are about to trespass, to take something that is not freely given. The sword is a tool of power, a symbol of human will imposed upon the wildness of nature. Why face west? The west is the direction of the setting sun, of the end of the day, of sleep and of death. It is a symbolic alignment with the very properties of the plant itself, an act of ritual harmony. And why the dancing? The talk of love. The root cutters had seen what the mandrake could do. They knew it could induce a sleep so deep it mimicked death. They knew from the traditions coming out of the East that it was tied to fertility and desire. This plant held power over the two great mysteries of human existence, love and death. To approach such a thing was not a simple act of gardening. It demanded respect. It demanded a ritual to appease the spirit, the genius that must surely dwell within such a potent human-shaped form. The dance and the words are a form of negotiation, a prayer to the plant, an attempt to engage with it on a spiritual level before taking it for your own purposes. Theophrastus, the careful scholar, presents these rituals without judgment. He is simply recording what is done, giving us the first written evidence that the act of harvesting a mandrake was already steeped in a sense of magical danger. The scream is not yet mentioned, but the fear that would one day give it a voice is already palpable. This strange marriage of practical pharmacology and supernatural ritual would define the mandrake's story for the next 2,000 years. And as the intellectual center of the world shifted from Athens to the sprawling, pragmatic and powerful city of Rome, our plant would find its most important champion, a man who would solidify its place as the single most important anesthetic in the ancient world. Our story now takes us into the heart of the Roman Empire, a vast and astonishingly well-organized machine of conquest, engineering and law. And with the Roman legions came Roman medicine. A Roman army on the march was not just a fighting force, it was a mobile city, complete with engineers, administrators, and crucially, physicians. Imagine the life of one such physician in the 1st century AD. His name is Pedanius Dioscorides. He was born in Anatolia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, and he served as a surgeon in the armies of the Emperor Nero. His world was one of brutal practicality. He wasn't working in a quiet library. He was in military camps, on the blood-soaked edges of the empire. He saw firsthand the horrific reality of ancient warfare, wounds from swords, spears, and catapult stones. He saw the agony of amputations performed with a simple saw, the torment of cauterization with a red-hot iron. Pain was not a philosophical concept to Dioscorides. It was a constant, deafening scream that filled his ears and his world, and his life's work was dedicated to silencing it. For 5 years he traveled with the army, from Gaul to Greece, from Spain to North Africa, and everywhere he went, he studied. He talked to local healers, he collected plants, he observed their effects with a soldier's discipline and a doctor's eye for detail. He compiled all this knowledge into a book that would become the single most influential medical text in the Western world for the next 1,500 years. It was called De Materia Medica, On Medical Materials. It was not a book of theory or folklore. It was a field manual, a pharmacopoeia, a definitive guide for healers. And in this monumental work, Dioscorides gives us the most clear-headed, detailed, and scientifically vital description of the mandrake from the entire ancient world. He begins by distinguishing between 2 types, which he calls male and female. Botanists today believe he was likely describing 2 different but related species, perhaps Mandragora officinarum and Mandragora autumnalis. He meticulously describes how to prepare the medicine. One should, he writes, boil the root in wine until the liquid is reduced by 2/3. This, he says, is the proper way to store its virtue. What he was doing, without knowing the chemistry, was creating a perfect tincture. The tropane alkaloids, the scopolamine, the atropine, the hyoscyamine are soluble in alcohol, Boiling the root in wine was a highly effective method of extracting the active compounds and creating a stable, potent, and relatively predictable dose. And then he tells us precisely what it is for. His words are so clear, so free of magical thinking, that they feel incredibly modern. He writes that a dose of this mandrake wine can be given to patients before they are cut or cauterized to cause a state of anesthesia. He uses the very word anesthesia, a state of non-sensation. He goes on to say that in this state they do not feel any pain. He recommends it for insomnia, for severe pain of any kind, and notes its use as a tranquilizer. Let us truly comprehend the magnitude of this. This is not folklore. This is not a ritual for appeasement. This is the birth of surgical anesthesia. Imagine again that Roman field hospital. A legionary has a gangrenous leg that must be removed to save his life. Before Dioscorides, this procedure would have been an act of unimaginable horror. The soldier held down by 4 men, his screams echoing through the camp as the surgeon sawed through his bone. But now, Dioscorides calmly administers a cup of the dark, bitter mandrake wine. He waits, he watches as the soldier's frantic eyes grow heavy, as his breathing slows, as his body, once rigid with terror and pain, goes limp. The soldier is not dead, he is simply absent. He is lost in a deep, dreamless chemical sleep. And now, the surgeon can work. He can cut, he can cauterize, he can save the man's life, all in a bubble of profound, artificial silence. The mandrake, for Dioscorides, was not a spirit to be feared. It was a tool, perhaps the most powerful tool in his entire medical kit. It was the gift of oblivion. It was mercy, distilled from a root. He transformed the forked man of the soil from an object of superstition into a cornerstone of rational medicine. His clear-eyed, practical understanding of the plant's properties was a beacon of scientific light that would tragically be almost extinguished in the centuries to come. But for a time, in the hands of physicians like Dioscorides, the mandrake wasn't a scream, it was the blessed silence that allowed for healing. At the very same time that Dioscorides was methodically cataloguing the mandrake's medical uses, another great Roman mind was collecting stories about it from a very different perspective. This was Pliny the Elder, a man whose curiosity was as vast as the empire itself. Pliny was not a specialist, he was an encyclopedist. His life's work, a colossal text called Naturalis Historia, or Natural History, was an attempt to gather all human knowledge about astronomy, geography, zoology, botany, and mineralogy into a single work. He was less interested in the controlled application of a drug than he was in collecting every fact, every story, and every belief associated with a subject. And so when Pliny writes about the mandrake, he gives us a perfect snapshot of the Roman worldview, where the practical observations of Dioscorides exist side by side with the folklore inherited from Theophrastus. Pliny confirms its use as an anesthetic. He notes that the scent of the leaves alone can be enough to induce sleep, and that for surgery it is sufficient for some to have taken the smell to be asleep. He mentions that a dose of the juice guarantees a sleep from which the patient may be safe from any incision or puncture. He understands its power. But then, with the same serious scholarly tone, he delves into the folklore of its harvest. He repeats the instruction to draw 3 circles with a sword. He adds that the harvester should stand with his back to the wind. And then he gives us the first complete, written account of the legend that will echo down through the ages. He writes that those who dig up the mandrake root must be careful to avoid its noxious breath, and that as it is pulled from the ground, it lets out a shriek that can be fatal to the one who hears it. To avoid this fate, Pliny records the prescribed method. The root cutter, having traced his circles and positioned himself correctly, should dig the earth away from the root. Then he should tie a rope around it and fasten the other end of the rope to the collar of a hungry dog. A piece of meat is then thrown just out of the dog's reach. The dog, lunging for the meat, will pull the root from the ground. The dog will hear the final deadly shriek and perish, a sacrifice that spares the human harvester. Here it is, the direct literary ancestor of the screaming mandrake of European folklore and eventually of Harry Potter. It's all there, the danger, the shriek, and the use of a proxy animal to absorb the deadly curse. For Pliny, this was not a silly superstition to be dismissed. It was a piece of data about the world, as worthy of recording as the plant's soporific qualities. He presents the medical fact and the magical ritual as two sides of the same coin, two equally valid parts of the story of this plant. What does this tell us? It reveals that even in the pragmatic, well-ordered Roman world, the mandrake's power was so profound, so unsettling, that it demanded a supernatural explanation. The logic is strangely compelling. A plant that can steal your consciousness, that can bring you to the very threshold of death and back again, must possess an immense and dangerous life force of its own. To extinguish that life force, to pull it from the earth, must therefore be a perilous act. The shriek is the imagined sound of that life force being violated. It's the audible manifestation of the plant's power being unleashed. The use of the dog is a masterful piece of psychological theatre. It transfers the risk. It allows the harvester to control a power that feels uncontrollable, to obtain the life-saving medicine without paying the ultimate spiritual price. Pliny the Elder, in his endless curiosity, preserved for us not just the science of the mandrake, but the soul of its mythology. He showed us that the Romans, for all their engineering and legal brilliance, were just as susceptible to the awe and fear inspired by the forked man of the soil as the Greek root cutters who came before them. And so, in the ancient world, the mandrake existed in a state of fascinating duality. It lived in two worlds at once. In one world, it was a respected and essential part of the materia medica. It was a botanical specimen, classified and described by men like Theophrastus. It was a powerful anesthetic and analgesic, prepared and administered by skilled physicians like Dioscorides. It was a tangible good, a source of relief from the brutalities of life. A surgeon could hold the root, grate it, boil it in wine, and know with a degree of certainty that it would bring a quiet sleep. It was a substance, governed by the predictable laws of nature, but in the other world, the world of the collective imagination, it was something more. It was a semi-human entity, an earth homunculus with a powerful and vengeful spirit. Its harvest was not a botanical act, but a dangerous magical rite that required swords and circles and animal sacrifice. It was an object of profound superstition, its power so great that it bled out from the physical realm into the supernatural. It was a risk, a taboo, a thing to be handled with the utmost care, not just for your body, but for your soul. This duality extended to its uses. In the hands of a physician, it was a healing agent, a benevolent medicine. But what happened when the dosage was increased? The soporific that brought sleep could easily become the poison that brought death. The famous poisoner Locusta, who worked for the Roman Empress Agrippina, likely had mandrake in her arsenal, alongside hemlock and aconite. A sleep from which one does not wake is a convenient and quiet form of murder. The line between healer and assassin was simply a matter of drops. And what of its connection to love and desire? The dudaim of the Old Testament, the love apples spoken of by Theophrastus. In the hands of a hopeful romantic, it was an aphrodisiac. But in the hands of someone more manipulative, it became the key ingredient in a love potion, a philtre. This was a form of chemical coercion, a way to bend the will of another through pharmacology. The Greeks and Romans had complex laws against the use of such potions, viewing them as a form of assault. And so the mandrake found itself in the center of another moral grey area. The same plant used to quiet the pain of a soldier could be used to create the madness of an unwanted obsession. Its alkaloids don't just sedate. In different combinations and doses, they can cause delirium, hallucinations, and a loss of inhibition. The love potion wasn't just a fantasy, it was a crude form of mind control, a chemical attack on another person's autonomy. This is the legacy of the mandrake from the ancient world. It was never just one thing. It was perceived as a divine gift for healing, and simultaneously as a dangerous tool for sorcery. It was the physician's trusted ally, and the poisoner's silent weapon. It was a symbol of fertility and a harbinger of death. Its very nature was a paradox. The source of this paradox, of course, was not in the plant itself. The plant is just a plant. It is a biological machine, patiently assembling tropane alkaloids according to the instructions in its DNA. The paradox was in us. Humanity looked at this plant, with its human shape and its profound power over the human mind, and projected onto it all of our own dualities, our capacity to heal and our capacity to harm, our desire for love and our lust for control, our yearning for relief from pain, and our deep primal fear of the unknown. The ancient world did not invent the scream of the mandrake, but it laid all the necessary groundwork. It identified the plant's uncanny shape. It recognized its immense psychoactive power, and it wrapped the act of its harvest in layers of ritual and fear. The whispers from Antiquity, from the papyri of Egypt, the verses of the Bible, and the scrolls of Greece and Rome tell a consistent story. They tell of a plant so potent, so deeply intertwined with the fundamentals of human experience, that it could not be treated as a simple weed. It had to be given a story, a personality, a dangerous voice. That story would be carried forward, copied by monks in chilly scriptoriums, and retold in the marketplaces of a Europe that was about to descend into the long, superstitious twilight of the Dark Ages. The rational, clear-eyed observations of Dioscorides would fade, and the fearful, fantastic tales collected by Pliny would grow, twisting and branching out like the plant's own strange roots into the fertile, shadowed soil of the medieval imagination. Chapter 4. The Medieval Scream. Black Dogs, Blood Rituals, and the Homunculus. And from that shadowed soil of the medieval imagination, something new began to grow. It took the form of the old stories, the old warnings, but it fed on a different kind of darkness. It was a darkness born of plague and famine, of a world where God seemed distant and the devil felt very, very near. The calm, medicinal voice of the Greek physician was now a forgotten whisper, drowned out by a story that had grown teeth, a story that now had the power to kill. The mandrake was no longer just a potent plant. It was becoming a terrestrial demon, a small, twisted gatekeeper between the world of the living and the world of the unspeakable. To understand this transformation, we must step out into the cold night air of medieval Europe. Leave the warm light of the monastery scriptorium, where the old texts were copied, and venture out to the places where belief was not an intellectual exercise, but a matter of life and death. We must go to the edge of the village, to the unploughed fields, and the lonely places where the gallows cast their long skeletal shadows under the moon. For this is where the new story of the mandrake begins, not with a harvest, but with a hunt. The medieval harvester was not a botanist. They were a ritualist, a sorcerer, a person steeling themselves for a terrible ordeal. They knew with a certainty that we can barely comprehend that the plant they sought was not merely alive in the way a turnip or a carrot is alive. It was sentient, it was malevolent, and it possessed a voice. A single, final, soul-shattering shriek uttered at the moment it was torn from the earth. To hear this shriek was not to be startled or frightened. It was to be annihilated. The sound, they believed, would stop your heart, curdle your blood, and send your spirit tumbling into damnation before your body even hit the ground. And so, a ritual was born, a piece of dark, practical magic designed to cheat the plant of its deadly revenge. It was an elaborate choreography of fear and desperation, passed down in hushed tones and recorded in the great herbals of the age, like the Hortus Sanitatis, not as folklore, but as a genuine life-saving procedure. First, you could not simply wander out and find the plant. You had to wait for the correct time. The moon had to be right, often dark or waning, a time when the veil between worlds was thin. The day of the week mattered, Friday being particularly potent, the day of Venus, but also the day of the crucifixion, a day steeped in death and transformation. You would go out at night, under a sky pricked with cold, indifferent stars. You carried with you not just a shovel, but tools of a very different kind, a sword or an iron dagger, a length of new rope, a piece of meat or bread, and wax. And most importantly, you brought a dog, but not just any dog. The texts are often specific. It had to be a black dog, perfectly black, without a single spot of white. A dog the color of midnight, the color of a sealed tomb. In the symbolic language of the time, black was the color of the chthonic, the underworld, the earth itself. A black dog was a creature already familiar with the paths of the dead, a suitable sacrifice, a proxy for the human soul. Often, it was recommended that the dog be starved for a day or two, to make it eager, to ensure its desperation would outweigh its fear. Once you found the mandrake, its dark, glossy leaves splayed out against the ground like a fallen star, the ritual would begin. You would not touch it. Not yet. First, you had to establish dominance. Using the point of your iron sword, you would trace 3 circles around the plant, moving counterclockwise against the path of the sun, an act of unmaking, of separating this small patch of earth from the holy, ordered world. This was now a space outside of God's grace, a stage for a dangerous transaction. As you drew the circles, you might whisper incantations, prayers to dark saints or to the earth itself, or perhaps simply remain silent, your own fear a prayer in itself. With the circles drawn, you would begin to dig, carefully, loosening the earth around the deep, forked root but never touching it. You would dig until the strange humanoid shape was almost fully exposed, a pale, twisted little body in the flickering torchlight. Now came the most critical moment. You would take the lump of wax and press it deep into your ears, sealing them against the coming doom. Some accounts say you would have an assistant with you, a horn blower, whose job it was to sound a great blast at the moment of uprooting, to help drown out the fatal scream with a more mundane noise. Then, you would take the new rope and tie one end securely around the neck of the exposed root. The other end you would tie around the neck or tail of the hungry black dog. You would retreat to a safe distance, just outside the circles you had drawn. From there, you would toss the piece of meat or bread just out of the dog's reach, on the far side of the mandrake, and then you would watch. The starved dog, seeing the food, would lunge, the rope would pull taut, and with a final desperate heave, the dog would wrench the mandrake root from the earth. At that precise instant, the legend says, the shriek would erupt, a sound not of this world, a sound of pure, condensed agony and malice. But you, with your ears full of wax, would hear nothing. The dog, however, would hear everything. It would receive the full lethal force of the plant's cry. It would fall to the ground, convulsing, and die at your feet. A life for a life, the dog's soul for the root's power. You had your prize, but the ground was now stained with a necessary sacrifice. The ritual was complete. You could now approach, take the strange silent root in your hands, and carry it home, the body of the poor dog left behind as payment to the earth. Imagine the psychological weight of this. Imagine performing this ritual, your heart pounding, the only sounds the scraping of your shovel and the panting of the doomed animal beside you. The dog's real, physical yelp of pain and fear as the root was torn from the ground would only serve as confirmation. It would sound, to your terrified mind, exactly like the beginning of a supernatural scream. You would have seen your proof. The legend would become real, cemented by the death of the creature you had brought with you. This was not a quaint story. It was a terrifying, hands-on process that reinforced the very belief system that created it. But why? Why was this plant believed to be so monstrous? Why did it require such a brutal, bloody price? The answer to that lies in its other great legend, the story of its origin. Because the mandrake, in the medieval mind, was not born from a simple seed. It grew in a very specific place, a place of ultimate despair and violent death, the ground beneath a gallows. The belief was that when a man was hanged, particularly a thief or a man who was innocent, his life cut unjustly short, his last involuntary seed, or his urine, or the fat that dripped from his decaying body, would fall to the ground. This final potent burst of life force, this essence of a life unwillingly surrendered, would impregnate the earth, and from that unholy union of death and earth, a mandrake would grow. This is why the root looked so human. It was, in a very real sense, the ghost of a dead man given vegetable form. It was a homunculus, an earthman, a creature that had never been truly born and could never truly die. It carried the agony of its conception in its very fibers. Its scream was the final, unheard scream of the man on the gallows. This belief, as gruesome as it is, has a faint echo in botanical reality. The mandrake, Mandragora officinarum, thrives in disturbed, loamy, nitrogen-rich soil. The area around a gallows, a place of burial, decay, and concentrated human activity, would have been exactly the kind of environment where such a plant might flourish. The medieval mind was brilliant at creating stories to explain observed phenomena. They saw a human-shaped root growing in a place of death, and they forged a connection that was as logical to them as genetics is to us. It was the ultimate example of sympathetic magic, like begets like. The body of a man gives birth to a body-shaped plant. So when our ritualist went to harvest the mandrake, they were not just digging up a root, they were retrieving a soul. They were handling an object soaked in injustice and violence. Of course it would scream, of course it would fight back. The elaborate ritual with the dog was not just about protecting oneself from a sound. It was a form of spiritual insulation, a way to handle a cursed object without becoming cursed yourself. Once this terrifying object was brought home, its story was far from over. The mandrake root was not simply stored in a drawer like other herbs. It had to be cared for, nurtured, almost adopted. It had become what was known as a familiar, a homunculus that could serve its master. This is where the mandrake moves from the world of the herbalist into the world of the witch. The root, now called an alraun in Germanic traditions, had to be carefully washed, often in red wine, a substitute for blood, purifying it and awakening its power. Then it would be dressed. People would wrap it in fine silks or white linen, sometimes crafting tiny clothes for it, as if it were a doll. It would be placed in a special box or casket, laid carefully on a bed of more silk, and kept hidden away from prying eyes. This little root man required constant attention. It had to be bathed on certain days, typically every Friday. It had to be fed with drops of milk or wine. If you cared for your mandrake properly, it would become your ally. It would answer your questions, its whispers heard only in your mind. It would protect your home from harm and your body from illness. Most importantly, it was believed to bring incredible wealth. The legend was that whatever money you placed beside the root in its box, you would find it doubled the next morning. It was a tiny, silent, magical mint, a secret partner in prosperity. But this partnership came with a terrible price. The mandrake familiar was a jealous and demanding creature. If you neglected it, if you forgot to bathe or feed it, its blessings would turn to curses. Your wealth would vanish, your health would fail, and terrible luck would befall your family. It was a bond that could not be easily broken, and it was a bond that extended beyond death. You could not simply keep the mandrake until you died. You had to sell it before your death, but you could not sell it for the same price you paid, nor could you give it away. You had to sell it for less than you acquired it for. This ensured that the root would pass from owner to owner, its value diminishing each time, its curse growing stronger. If you died while still in possession of the mandrake, your soul was forfeit. The little earthman would drag you down to hell with it, claiming you as its final payment. You can see the deep anxiety embedded in this folklore. In a world of precarious fortunes where wealth could be wiped out by a bad harvest or a passing army, the idea of a magical object that could guarantee prosperity was deeply seductive, but it was also deeply heretical. It was a pact, a shortcut that bypassed hard work and faith in God. And like any pact with a power that was not divine, it came with a satanic loophole, a damning clause in the fine print. The doubling of the coins was a form of usury, a sin in itself, and the root was merely the agent of that sin. The Church, for its part, saw the mandrake as nothing less than a tool of the devil. Its human form was a parody of God's creation of Adam. Its whispered advice was the counsel of demons. The wealth it brought was a demonic temptation, meant to lure a soul away from God. During the height of the witch trials, countless men and women were accused, tortured, and executed based on the discovery of a strangely shaped root in their possession. It could be a mandrake, or it could be a simple briny root, which also has a vaguely humanoid shape. It didn't matter. The story was so powerful that the mere existence of the object was proof of a pact with Satan. Confessions were extracted under torture, where the accused would admit to feeding the root, talking to it, using it to curse their neighbors or summon storms. The gentle, sleep-inducing medicine of Dioscorides had become a piece of evidence in a capital crime. It had become a ticket to the pyre. This entire edifice of terror, the screaming, the dog, the gallows, the demonic pact, was built upon the foundations of the plant's real, observable properties. Its anthropomorphic shape was the seed crystal around which the entire folklore grew. But it was the plant's potent chemistry that gave these stories their lifeblood. The tropane alkaloids in Mandragora officinarum, atropine, scopolamine, hyoscyamine are powerful anticholinergics. In small controlled doses, they are a sedative, a painkiller, an anesthetic. This is the medicinal truth that the ancient world understood. But in slightly larger, uncontrolled doses, these same chemicals are potent hallucinogens and deliriants. They can induce a state of waking dream, a twilight consciousness where reality and fantasy blur. A person under the influence of Mandrake might experience vivid hallucinations, a feeling of flying, and a profound disorientation. They would have terrifying visions and hear phantom voices. Now consider the medieval harvester, already primed by folklore to expect a supernatural encounter. They are handling a plant known to be psychoactive. Perhaps they get a small amount of the juice on their skin, which is absorbed. Perhaps a tiny amount of pollen or dust is inhaled. Their mind, already taut with fear, is now being subtly altered by powerful chemicals. The shadows flicker. The wind in the trees sounds like a whisper. The rustle of a leaf becomes a footstep. The dog's whimper becomes a death shriek. The entire ritual is experienced through a filter of heightened, chemically induced paranoia. The legend doesn't just create the experience. The plant's own chemistry helps to validate it. The homunculus too can be seen through this lens. The whispers of the root, the advice it gave, could easily have been the product of a mind subtly influenced by proximity to these alkaloids, turning one's own internal monologue into a perceived dialogue with an external magical entity. The plant wasn't just an object of belief, it was an active participant in the generation of its own mythology. It was a co-author of its own terrifying story. The story of the medieval mandrake is a dark mirror held up to the anxieties of the age. In a world rife with plague, the desire for a panacea, a cure-all, was overwhelming. The mandrake, with its real anesthetic properties, was seen as a source of ultimate health, but one that came from a dark place. In a world of crushing poverty and feudalism, the dream of effortless, doubling wealth was a desperate fantasy. In a world dominated by a strict religious orthodoxy, the allure of a personal, controllable source of power and knowledge was a profound heresy. The mandrake became a focal point for all these fears and desires. It was a physical manifestation of the bargain between desperation and damnation. It represented the terrifying idea that the earth itself could give birth to things that were outside of God's plan, things that were born of violence and belonged to the devil, but that could for a short and terrible time be bent to human will. The rituals, the dogs, the incantations, they were all part of a desperate human attempt to control the uncontrollable, to harness a power that felt both demonic and deeply frighteningly alive. It was the ultimate Faustian bargain, not with a demon in a puff of smoke, but with a twisted little root pulled screaming from the blood-soaked earth, and the echoes of that scream would haunt the imagination of Europe for centuries. A chilling reminder that some secrets of the natural world are so strange they can only be understood through the language of nightmares. Chapter 5. From Grimoire to Stage, the Mandrake's Cultural Shadow. And the echoes of that scream would haunt the imagination of Europe for centuries. A chilling reminder that some secrets of the natural world are so strange they can only be understood through the language of nightmares. But nightmares, as we know, are not content to stay locked away in the sleeping mind. They have a way of seeping out, of staining the waking world with their strange logic and their potent fears. And so it was with the Mandrake. Its story, born in the soil and nurtured in the shadows of folklore, was about to step into the light. The private terror of the root puller, the whispered secret of the village healer, was about to find a new and much larger home, on the stage, in the pages of poetry, and in the fevered dreams of artists and philosophers. The Mandrake was about to become a cultural icon, a vessel for humanity's deepest anxieties and its most profound desires. Its journey from the grimoire to the gallery, from a patch of dirt to the heart of Western literature, is a remarkable story of how a real plant, a quiet member of the Nightshade family, can be transformed by the sheer force of human imagination. It's a strange thing to consider, isn't it? How a plant can become a celebrity. We don't often think of them that way, but for a time, Mandragora Officinarum was perhaps the most famous plant in the world, and much of that fame can be traced back to one man and one unforgettable line of poetry. In the late 16th century, in a crowded, noisy theatre in London, an audience held its breath as a young girl, Juliet Capulet, contemplated a desperate, dangerous plan. Fearing she will wake up alone in her family's tomb, she spirals into a litany of horrors, and to give voice to the most unbearable sound she can imagine, she reaches for an image that every person in that theatre, from the groundlings to the nobles, would have instantly understood, and shrieks, she says, like mandrakes torn out of the earth, that living mortals, hearing them, run mad. With those few words, William Shakespeare took a piece of ancient, murky folklore and cast it in bronze. He gave the mandrake's scream a permanent place in the soundscape of the English language. He didn't invent the legend, of course. He was merely drawing from the deep well of common knowledge, the shared superstitions of his age. But in doing so, he validated it. He elevated it from a peasant's tale to high art. After Shakespeare, the scream was no longer just a rumor, it was literature. Let's just pause with that for a moment. Imagine yourself there, in the Globe Theatre. The air is thick with the smell of sweat and damp wool, and maybe a hint of oranges. The only light comes from the open roof above, or perhaps the flicker of torches as evening draws in. There is no amplification, no sound system. There is only the power of the human voice and the collective imagination of the crowd. And into that space, an actor speaks of a sound so terrible it can shatter the human mind. The power of the image lies in its shared understanding. Shakespeare knew his audience would feel a genuine physical shiver at the thought. They knew of the mandrake. They believed in its power, in its uncanny resemblance to a human being, in the terrible price one paid for disturbing its slumber. For the Elizabethan mind, the world was a far more enchanted and a far more terrifying place. The boundaries we now draw so clearly between the human, the animal, and the vegetable kingdoms were much more porous. They lived with the concept of the great chain of being, a divine hierarchy where everything had its place, but where strange echoes and resemblances could exist between the different links. The mandrake was one of these unsettling echoes. It was a plant, yes, but it looked like a man. It grew in the earth, but it was believed to have a spirit. To pull it from the ground was not an act of agriculture, it was an act of violation, a kind of murder. And so, of course, it screamed. It screamed with the agony of a being torn between two worlds. Shakespeare uses the image more than once. In Henry VI, Part 2, the Duke of Suffolk, cursing his enemies, spits, "Would curses kill as doth the mandrake's groan?" Here, it's a groan, a slightly different but no less chilling sound, associated directly with a fatal power. And in Antony and Cleopatra, the Queen, longing for her lover, wishes for a drink that could induce a sleep so deep that she could sleep out this great gap of time. My Antony is away. She calls for Mandragora, the Latin name for the plant, this time not for its scream, but for its other, very real quality, its power as a soporific, a potent anesthetic. This is the beautiful complexity of the mandrake's role in our culture. It contained multitudes. Shakespeare, the master observer of human nature, understood this perfectly. He saw that this one humble plant could represent the absolute extremes of experience, a sound that drives you mad with horror, and a substance that can give you the peace of oblivion. Life and death, agony and peace, all wrapped up in one gnarled, bifurcated root. And this duality is precisely why it captured the imagination so completely. It was a mirror. It reflected back to us our own complex, contradictory nature. The scream we imagined hearing from the earth was, perhaps, simply the echo of the screams already inside us. All the plant had to do was provide the form, the strange little puppet-like root, and our minds, our fears, and our poets would do the rest. But the mandrake wasn't only a vessel for our fears of death and madness. Its strange, human-like form also tied it inextricably to the mysteries of the human body itself, to its desires, its functions, and its future. The scream might have been its most famous attribute, but its supposed power over fertility was arguably its most sought after. If a root looked so much like a tiny human, the logic of the doctrine of signatures was inescapable. It must have power over human generation. And while Shakespeare gave the mandrake its voice of tragedy, another great Renaissance mind would give it a starring role in a very different kind of story, a cynical and brilliant comedy of human lust. Let us travel south now, from the damp twilight of Elizabethan England to the sun-drenched, scheming world of Renaissance Florence. Here, in the early 16th century, a man named Niccolò Machiavelli, known to history as a cold-eyed political philosopher, wrote a play. It was a savage, satirical piece called La Mandragora, the Mandrake. And in this play, the plant is not a source of supernatural terror, but the central gear in a machine of elaborate deception. The plot is a masterpiece of cynical comedy. A young man, Callimaco, is desperately in love with Lucrezia, the beautiful young wife of an old, foolish lawyer named Nisia. Lucrezia is virtuous, and Nisia is desperate for an heir. The couple has been unable to conceive, a source of great shame and frustration. So Callimaco, with the help of a cunning parasite, hatches a plan. He disguises himself as a famous doctor and convinces the gullible Nisia that he has the ultimate cure for their infertility, a potion made from the mandrake root. Here the folklore is presented as established, almost scientific fact within the world of the play. The doctor explains that the potion will undoubtedly make Lucrezia fertile. But, he adds, there is one terrible side effect. The potion is so potent that the first man to lie with her after she drinks it will absorb all its poison and die within a week. The solution he proposes is simple. They must find some hapless young vagrant, force him into Lucrezia's bed for the night to soak up the poison, and then Nisia can safely sleep with his wife and conceive the heir he so desires. Of course, the hapless young vagrant will be Callimaco himself, in another disguise. The rest of the play is a brilliant clockwork farce of convincing the virtuous Lucrezia, with the help of her corrupt mother and a greedy friar, to go along with this morally outrageous plan for the sake of having a child. The mandrake potion is the pivot upon which the entire plot turns. It is the perfect excuse, the magical key that unlocks every door of morality and social convention. What is so fascinating about La Mandragora is how it treats the plant. The scream is never mentioned. The gothic horror is gone. The mandrake has been domesticated, brought out of the blood-soaked earth and into the apothecary's shop, into the bedroom. It's a pharmaceutical, a tool. Its power is still believed to be immense, a matter of life and death, but it is a power that these cynical modern characters believe they can manage, manipulate, and use to their own ends. They aren't afraid of the mandrake's soul. They are simply trying to navigate its supposed chemical properties. Machiavelli's play shows us a world in transition. The belief in the plant's power is still absolute, but the attitude towards that power has shifted from superstitious terror to pragmatic exploitation. It's a reflection of the Renaissance mind, a mindset that was beginning to see the natural world less as an enchanted forest full of spirits and more as a collection of resources to be understood and utilized. The mandrake becomes a symbol not of nature's terrifying mystery, but of human cunning and the lengths to which people will go for desire, whether it's for love, for legacy, or for money. The real plant, Mandragora officinarum, lingers behind this plot, a silent botanical truth. Its real alkaloids, hyoscyamine and scopolamine, do have potent effects. They can cause delirium, hallucinations, and a kind of twilight sleep, a state where reality and dream blur. It's not a great leap to see how these disorienting psychoactive properties, combined with the root's suggestive shape, could cement its reputation as a powerful aphrodisiac and fertility aid. The mind, under the influence of such chemicals, is a suggestible thing. A person could easily believe the plant was working, that it was unlocking some primal, fertile energy within them. Machiavelli, with his sharp, unsparing insight into human nature, understood that the most powerful potion of all is the one we want to believe in. The mandrake in his play is a placebo in a world that doesn't yet have a word for it, its efficacy guaranteed by the desperate desires of those who use it. And as these stories, both tragic and comic, were told and retold across Europe, artists and scholars were faced with a unique challenge. How do you draw a scream? How do you paint a desire? How do you render, in ink and pigment, a plant that was believed to be half human? The visual history of the mandrake is as rich and strange as its literary one. To trace its depiction through the centuries is to watch our entire relationship with the natural world evolve on the page, from myth to observation, from monster to specimen. Let us close our eyes and drift back, further back this time, into the quiet scriptorium of a monastery, or the dusty workshop of a medieval illustrator. Before the printing press, every book was a unique handmade object, and the herbals, the great catalogues of medicinal plants, were among the most precious. If we were to open one of these illuminated manuscripts, say the famous 6th century codex known as the Vienna Dioscorides, we would find our plant, and it would look almost nothing like the real thing. The image is not a botanical study, it is an illustration of a myth. We see a stylized plant with broad leaves and little round fruits, but our eyes are drawn to the root. It is, without ambiguity, a little man, sometimes with a beard. His limbs are the branches of the root, and often tied to him by a rope is a dog. The dog is yelping, dying, its mouth open in its final agony. In the background, a human figure, the root puller, stands with his hands clapped over his ears. It is the entire story of the harvest, the entire body of folklore, captured in a single static image. The artist wasn't concerned with the precise shape of the leaves or the color of the flowers. He was concerned with conveying the plant's power, its danger, and the specific ritualistic method required to obtain it. The drawing is a warning. It is an instruction manual for a supernatural encounter. For centuries, this was how the mandrake was seen. In woodcuts and early printed herbals, the homunculus, the little root person, was the star. The illustrations were copied from one another, the myth reinforcing itself with each new edition. Artists rendered mandrakes and womandrakes, male and female forms, sometimes with shocking anatomical detail. They were often depicted as grim, sorrowful little beings, their leafy hair crowning a troubled face, their root limbs twisted in a silent, earthy agony. Flipping through these ancient pages is like looking at a family album for a mythical creature. You see it change over time, but its essential nature remains the same. The artists weren't just drawing a plant, they were drawing a belief. They were rendering a fear. They were giving a face to the uncanny spirit of the earth. But then, slowly, a change begins. A new kind of curiosity starts to ripple through the world of European scholarship. The Renaissance and the dawn of the scientific revolution brought with them a new and radical idea that the world should be understood not just by reading the ancient authorities, but by looking at it directly. Naturalists began to leave their studies and venture into the fields and forests. They began to collect specimens, to dissect, to draw what was actually there. And this shift in perspective would have a profound effect on our little mandrake. The turning point can be seen in the work of men like Leonhard Fuchs, a German physician and botanist. In 1542, he published his magnificent herbal De Historia Stirpium on the history of plants. It was filled with hundreds of beautiful, detailed woodcuts. And when we turn to the page for Mandragora, we see something revolutionary. We see a plant. The root is still thick and bifurcated, still suggestive of a human form, but it is undeniably a root. It is knobbly and earthen, not fleshy and smooth. Above it, the artist has rendered the leaves with breathtaking precision. We can see their shape, their texture, the way they grow in a rosette, low to the ground. We can see the bell-shaped flowers and the small globular fruits, which look something like tiny yellow tomatoes. The homunculus is gone. The screaming mannequin has been banished, replaced by the quiet, observable facts of botany. Fuchs's illustration wasn't just a new drawing. It was a new way of seeing. It was a declaration that the truth of a plant lies in its physical reality, not in the legends that have grown up around it. It was a quiet but firm correction of centuries of superstition. This doesn't mean that the folklore died out overnight, of course. The old monstrous images of the mandrake would continue to be printed for a long time. But the tide had turned. The slow, patient work of empirical observation had begun. The story of the mandrake's illustration is, in miniature, the story of the birth of modern botany. It is the story of how we learnt to look past the monster, to see the specimen, to silence the imaginary scream so that we could finally begin to understand the plant itself. But even as botanists were patiently stripping the mandrake of its human form, pinning it to the page and classifying it within the family Solanaceae, another group of thinkers was embracing its strange duality for that very reason. For the alchemists, the mandrake's uncanny resemblance to a human wasn't a superstition to be corrected. It was a profound truth to be explored. It was a symbol of the deepest mysteries of creation. To step into the world of the alchemist is to step into a world of metaphor. It was a practice that was part chemistry, part mysticism, and part philosophy. While the popular image is of men trying to turn lead into gold, that was often just a metaphor for a much deeper quest, the quest for spiritual transformation, for the purification of the soul, and for the unification of the self. The alchemist's laboratory, with its strange glass retorts and bubbling alembics, was a microcosm of the universe, and every substance within it was not just a chemical, but a symbol. And for this symbolic language, the mandrake was an almost perfect glyph. The alchemists were obsessed with the idea of the prima materia, the first matter. This was the original, chaotic, unformed substance from which the entire universe was made. It was the raw potential of existence, containing all possibilities within it. To find and understand the prima materia was the first and most crucial step in the great work, the alchemical journey. And the mandrake, in its strange, in-between nature, was seen as a perfect earthly manifestation of this concept. It was born of the earth, of dark, formless matter, but it grew into a shape that mimicked the pinnacle of creation, the human form, the vessel of spirit. It was matter aspiring to be spirit. It was chaos given a hint of divine order. To the alchemist, the mandrake root was not a little man. It was a philosophical statement. It was a living piece of the prima materia, a key to the very stuff of reality. Furthermore, the entire alchemical process was based on the idea of uniting opposites. The famous goal, the philosopher's stone, was also called the rebes, which means the two thing. It represented the perfect integration of duality, sun and moon, fire and water, male and female, sulfur and mercury, spirit and body. And once again, the mandrake was a living embodiment of this principle. The folklore had long spoken of male and female mandrakes. It was a plant that grew down into the darkness of the earth, but also produced fruit that reached up towards the light of the sun. Most importantly, its very essence was a paradox. It was a potent poison that could kill, but it was also a powerful medicine that could heal and grant sleep. It was both bane and balm, destroyer and preserver. In the cryptic, dreamlike illustrations of alchemical texts, we see the mandrake transformed yet again. It is no longer a botanical specimen. It is a king and queen joined in one body. It is a two-headed being rising from a grave, symbolizing resurrection and transformation. It is held in a flask, the philosophical egg, where it is to be broken down, purified, and reconstituted into something new and more perfect. These images are not meant to be taken literally. They are mandalas for contemplation, complex diagrams of a psychological and spiritual process. The alchemist meditating on the image of the mandrake was not thinking about botany. He was thinking about the warring factions within his own soul and the possibility of their reconciliation. This is perhaps the most abstract and strangest chapter in the mandrake's cultural life. It completes a remarkable journey. The plant itself, Mandragora officinarum, a member of the Nightshade family, with a thick taproot and a cluster of potent neurotoxins, never changed. It just quietly grew in the stony soil of the Mediterranean, flowering and fruiting as it had for millennia. But the human perception of it traveled an immense distance. It began as a real physical thing, a useful and dangerous plant. It then became a monster, a demonic homunculus that screamed when it was killed. From there, it stepped onto the stage, becoming a character, a plot device for both tragedy and comedy. Then, through the patient eyes of science, it was reduced back to a plant, a specimen to be catalogued and understood. And finally, in the smoky retorts of the alchemists, it was elevated once more, becoming a pure symbol, a key to the cosmic order and the human soul. It is a testament to the incredible power of our minds to project meaning onto the natural world. We look at a forked root, and we see ourselves. We hear the wind in the leaves, and we imagine a scream. We observe its chemical effects, and we dream of potions for love and immortality. The mandrake never asked for any of this fame, this infamy. It became a screen onto which we projected our greatest fears, our most cynical desires, and our most profound spiritual aspirations. Its cultural shadow tells us very little about the plant itself, in the end, but it tells us everything about us. Chapter 6: The Silence of the Root, Enlightenment and the Demystification of Magic. And yet, that reflection was about to change. The mirror that the mandrake held up to humanity was beginning to cloud over, not with the mists of further superstition, but with the focused breath of a new kind of inquiry. The us that the root had reflected for millennia, a people who saw spirits in the wood and heard omens on the wind, was on the cusp of a profound transformation. A new human was emerging, one who carried not a magical charm to protect against the dark, but a lantern with which to study it. The questions we asked of the world were beginning to shift, from the ancient and reverent why to the modern, incisive and endlessly curious how. And so the great silencing began. Not with a bang, but with a quiet turning of pages and the gentle scratching of a quill pen. Across Europe, a new light was dawning, an era that would later be called the Age of Enlightenment. It was a time of intense intellectual curiosity, a period when the dusty attics of ancient belief were thrown open, and the bright, sometimes harsh light of reason was allowed to pour in. The world, which had for so long been a book of divine symbols and allegories, was slowly being reread as a book of mechanics, of causes and effects. And in this great intellectual audit, every old story was brought forth for examination. The mandrake, heavy with the weight of its own mythology, was placed upon the table. The first and most dramatic of its legends to face this new scrutiny was, of course, its scream. For the emerging class of natural philosophers, the men and women who would become our first true botanists and biologists, the scream was not a mystery to be feared, but a claim to be tested. The new logic was simple and devastatingly effective. For a thing to scream, it must possess the apparatus of a scream. It would need lungs to hold the air, a larynx, vocal cords to vibrate. They looked at the mandrake root, at its dense, starchy flesh, its tough skin, its branching limbs, and they asked, where is the anatomy for such a sound? Imagine a scholar, perhaps in Padua or Leiden, carefully slicing a preserved root. The scalpel moves not with the frantic fear of a sorcerer's apprentice, but with the steady hand of an anatomist. He is not listening for a death shriek, but looking for a structure. He maps the vascular bundles, notes the texture of the parenchyma cells, sketches the periderm, and in all this meticulous observation, he finds a plant. A complex and fascinating plant, to be sure, but a plant nonetheless. There are no lungs. There are no vocal cords. There is no mechanism for a scream. The conclusion, when it came, was as quiet as the studies that produced it. The scream was not a property of the plant. It was a property of human fear. It was the shriek of our own anxiety, projected onto a silent root. It was the rustle of leaves in a lonely wood, amplified by a terrified imagination. It was the groan of the root being torn from the resistant earth, interpreted by an ear already primed for magic. The new science acted like a candle brought into a dark room. The terrifying monster that was imagined in the corner is revealed to be nothing more than a coat hanging on a chair. The fear was real, but its source was an illusion. The scream of the Mandrake was one of the first great ghosts to be exorcised by the unflinching gaze of empiricism. With the scream relegated to the realm of folklore, a peasant superstition, the natural philosophers could begin the real work of understanding the plant for what it was. This was the age of the great cataloguers, the architects of order. The printing press, which had once spread the fantastical tales of the Mandrake in lavishly illustrated herbals filled with homunculi, now became a tool for its demystification. Illustrations became less fanciful and more precise. The little man figure receded from the page, replaced by painstakingly accurate botanical drawings. We see the true shape of the leaves, the bell-like curve of the flowers, the exact arrangement of the stamens and pistils. The plant was being stripped of its persona and given its scientific identity. This process culminated in the work of the great Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus. In his grand system for organizing the natural world, he gave the mandrake its final formal name, Mandragora officinea. It was a quiet, almost bureaucratic moment, but its significance was immense. The plant was no longer a rogue agent, a creature of myth existing outside the rules. It was now placed within a family, the Solanesi, the Nightshades. It was given relatives, the tomato, the potato, the belladonna. It was given an address in the vast logical city of life that science was constructing. To give something its proper name is to hold a certain power over it. And in this act of naming, the scientific world declared that the mandrake was no longer a master of dark arts, but a subject for disciplined study. It was a plant, and like any other plant, it could be known. And the deepest part of that knowing was yet to come. For centuries, the mandrake's power was understood as a form of magic, a spirit or essence within the root that could bewitch the human soul. But the Enlightenment mind was no longer satisfied with such explanations. If the plant had a powerful effect on the human body and no one disputed that it did, there had to be a physical, material reason. The alchemist's quest for a spiritual philosopher's stone was slowly transforming into the chemist's search for an active principle. The magic, they suspected, was not a spirit but a substance. The laboratory became the new sacred grove. Instead of rituals and incantations, there were beakers and distillations, titrations and crystallizations. Early chemists took the raw mandrake root and began the patient, methodical work of taking it apart. They ground it into powders, dissolved it in alcohols, boiled it in waters, and filtered it through cloths. It was a kind of reverse alchemy. They weren't trying to turn lead into gold, they were trying to break down a single complex organism into its simplest, most potent components. They were like detectives interrogating a silent suspect, using the language of chemistry to force it to give up its secrets. And then, in the 19th century, the breakthrough came. Working not just with mandrake, but with its equally potent cousins like henbane and belladonna, chemists began to isolate the specific molecules responsible for their dramatic effects. They were a family of compounds we now call the tropane alkaloids. 3 in particular stood out: atropine, scopolamine, and hyoscyamine. These were the names of the spirits that had haunted the mandrake root for millennia. The magic finally had a chemical formula. Suddenly, the ancient mysteries could be explained with a breathtaking new clarity. The experience of consuming a mandrake potion was no longer the work of a possessing demon. It was a predictable, if severe, physiological event. Let's step into that world, the world of the molecule, and see what they found. Imagine your nervous system as a vast and intricate communications network, a city of trillions of tiny connections. Messages are constantly being sent to manage everything from your heartbeat to your thoughts. One of the most important messengers, or neurotransmitters in this system, is a molecule called acetylcholine. It's the courier that carries the signal to your muscles to contract, to your salivary glands to produce saliva, to the iris in your eye to constrict in bright light. Now picture the alkaloids from the mandrake root entering this system. Atropine, for example, is a master of disguise. Its molecular shape is incredibly similar to acetylcholine. It arrives at the receptor, the cellular mailbox designed for acetylcholine, and it fits perfectly into the slot. But here is the crucial difference. It doesn't deliver a message. It just sits there, blocking the mailbox. It's a key that fits the lock but won't turn. The consequences of this molecular traffic jam are profound. The real acetylcholine messengers arrive, but they can't deliver their instructions. The mailboxes are all full, and so the systems they control begin to fail. The salivary glands don't get the message to produce saliva, so the mouth goes dry. The sweat glands don't get the signal, so the skin becomes hot and flushed. The muscles in the iris don't get the instruction to constrict, so the pupils dilate wide, letting in a flood of light and blurring vision. The regulating signals to the heart are blocked, so the pulse begins to race. Every one of these was a classic, terrifying symptom of mandrake poisoning, once attributed to the plant's demonic rage. Now it was revealed to be a simple, elegant, and dangerous act of molecular mimicry. And then there was scopolamine. This molecule is small enough to cross the fiercely protective barrier between the bloodstream and the brain. Once inside the central command of your consciousness, it does the same thing as atropine, but in the delicate circuits that manage memory, cognition, and perception. It blocks the acetylcholine mailboxes in the brain. The result is not just a physical disruption, but a mental one. The flow of information is scrambled, thoughts become disjointed. The line between reality and dream dissolves. This explains the powerful hallucinations, the delirium, the amnesia, the feeling of being utterly bewitched, of losing one's own mind. It wasn't a spirit stealing your soul, it was a chemical interfering with the delicate dance of neurotransmitters that creates your reality. The truth serum of spy novels and the knockout drops of old crime fiction find their ancestor here, in this molecule's ability to unplug the conscious mind. The discovery of these alkaloids was the final, definitive silencing of the mandrake's mythological scream. The plant was not a vengeful homunculus. It was a master chemist. Over millions of years of evolution, it had developed these potent molecules as a defense mechanism, a chemical shield to deter animals from eating it. To produce such complex compounds is an act of biological genius. The plant is a tiny, silent factory, using only sunlight, water, and soil to synthesize molecules that can hijack the nervous system of an animal 1,000 times its size. The ore once reserved for its magical power could now be transferred to the sheer elegance of its biochemistry. The magic wasn't gone, it had simply been given a new name: evolutionary biology. This new understanding had a dramatic impact on the field of medicine. The mandrake, for all its dangers, had been one of humanity's most important painkillers and anesthetics for millennia. Its use in surgery, as described by Dioscorides, was not a myth. The soporific sponge, soaked in an opiate and mandrake solution, could indeed render a patient unconscious enough to endure the horror of ancient surgery. But it was a terrifyingly blunt instrument. The problem was one of dosage. When you use the whole root, you are administering an unknown quantity of dozens of active compounds. One root might be much more potent than another. The concentration of alkaloids can vary based on the soil, the season, the age of the plant. Giving a patient a mandrake preparation was like playing a game of chemical roulette. The dose required for unconsciousness was perilously close to the dose that would cause respiratory failure and death. The surgeon walked a razor's edge between relief and tragedy with every single patient. The isolation of the pure alkaloids changed everything. For the first time, physicians could administer a precise, measured and repeatable dose. They could give a patient exactly 500 micrograms of atropine and know exactly what the physiological effect would be. It was the birth of modern pharmacology. The brute force of herbalism was being replaced by the surgical precision of chemistry. It's the difference between trying to put out a candle with a fire hose and using a gentle puff of air. And with this new precision came a new generation of medicines. Chemists weren't just content to isolate the molecules from the plant. They began to study their structure, to understand how they worked, and then to create their own. The second half of the 19th century saw the development of synthetic anesthetics like ether and chloroform. These new drugs were more reliable, their effects were more controllable, and they were safer than the wild, unpredictable chemistry of the Mandrake. The soporific sponge was retired to the museum shelf. The Mandrake, the king of surgical anesthesia for 2,000 years, was rendered obsolete. Its long reign was over. The very science that had finally explained its power was the same science that created its replacement. It was a quiet, unceremonious end to its medical career. It had been a powerful but dangerous ally, a teacher who had shown us the profound connection between the chemical world and our own consciousness. But we had learned its lessons, and we had moved on. And so we see the Mandrake's journey through this era of reason. Its scream was silenced by anatomy. Its form was captured and classified by botany. Its soul was identified as a collection of alkaloids by chemistry, and its job was made redundant by pharmacology. It was a systematic piece-by-piece dismantling of a myth, the magical worldview that saw the universe as an enchanted place full of hidden meanings and sentient forces was giving way to a mechanical worldview, which saw the universe as a great intricate clockwork machine, impersonal, orderly, and most importantly, understandable. Something was undoubtedly lost in this transition. We lost a sense of intimate, if fearful, connection to a living, breathing, and sometimes screaming natural world. The universe became a little quieter, a little colder perhaps. The demystification of the Mandrake is a parable for our relationship with all of nature. We traded mystery for knowledge, enchantment for control. But think of what was gained. We gained the ability to ease human suffering with a safety and efficacy that would have seemed like the purest magic to our ancestors. We gained a new kind of wonder, not the wonder of superstition, but the profound awe that comes from understanding the sheer mind-boggling complexity of life on a molecular level. We learned that the Mandrake doesn't need a scream to be incredible. Its true power, its true magic, lies in its silence, the quiet, patient, brilliant chemistry unfolding within its cells, a silent pharmacist that took millions of years to perfect its craft. The Enlightenment may have silenced the mythical root, but it allowed us, for the very first time, to hear the beautiful, intricate music of its biology. And that, in its own way, is a kind of enchantment far deeper than any ancient spell. Chapter 7. The Root Re-enchanted. From Victorian occultism to modern pop culture. And yet, for all the beautiful, silent music that science revealed, a part of us began to miss the scream. It's a curious feature of the human spirit. Just as we were learning to decode the elegant language of molecules and alkaloids, a quiet nostalgia began to stir for the old dramatic opera of folklore. The Enlightenment had given us answers, but in doing so, it had taken away some of our most profound and terrifying questions. The world, mapped and measured and understood, felt a little smaller, a little quieter. The gas lamps of the 19th century pushed back the physical darkness, but for many, they also seemed to extinguish a certain kind of inner light, a flicker of ancient mystery. And so, in the heart of the age of steam and steel, an age of reason and empire, a strange and beautiful flower began to grow in the cracks of certainty. It was a search for re-enchantment. If science had claimed the sunlit world, then these new explorers would become archaeologists of the soul, digging down into the shadowed earth of history, searching for what had been lost. They were looking for the old magic, and in their search, they once again found the Mandrake. Imagine the late Victorian era, a world of sepia-toned photographs and elaborate heavy fabrics. It was a time of immense, almost dizzying progress. Railroads were stitching continents together, telegraph cables were whispering across ocean floors, and the theories of Darwin had fundamentally rewritten our own origin story. But beneath this surface of relentless modernity, there was an equal and opposite current. A fascination with spiritualism, with seances in darkened parlors, with the secrets of the Orient, with the lost wisdom of the ancients. It was in this environment that secret societies, like the famous Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, came into being. These were not charlatans in the simple sense. They were often scholars, poets, artists, people like W.B. Yeats and Aleister Crowley, who felt a profound sense of spiritual dislocation. They saw the ancient grimoires and alchemical texts not as historical curiosities, but as blueprints for a technology of the soul that had been forgotten. They were attempting to reverse engineer enchantment, and for them the mandrake was not just a plant. It was a word in a lost language. It was a key. To the members of the Golden Dawn, steeped in the complex symbolism of the Kabbalah, astrology and Egyptian magic, the mandrake was a nexus point. Its human shape was no mere coincidence. It was a sign, a signature from nature itself, that this plant was a bridge between the vegetable kingdom and the human one. It was a living homunculus, a tiny earthen avatar of Adam Kadmon, the primordial human. Its deep forked root, plunging into the darkness of the soil, represented the journey into the subconscious, into the underworld of the self. Its leaves reaching for the sun represented the conscious mind, the flowering of enlightenment. To possess a mandrake root was to hold a map of the universe in miniature. The scream, for them, was reinterpreted. It was no longer just the cry of a dying demon. It was the raw, undifferentiated power of creation itself. The shriek of a soul being torn from its home in the earth. To harvest it was to engage in a profound act of spiritual midwifery, and the rituals described in their private, hand-copied texts were complex and precise, designed to properly channel this immense power without being destroyed by it. The dog, the horn, the ivory circles, these were not just superstitions, they were the safety protocols for handling a kind of spiritual nuclear material. The plant's very real toxicity, its ability to induce visions and a trance-like state, was seen as proof of its power. It was a physical key that could unlock non-physical doors, allowing the magician to travel in the spirit realms, to commune with angels and other intelligences that they believed coexisted with our own reality. The mandrake, silenced by the botanists and chemists, had found a new voice in the hushed, incense-filled temples of these Victorian magicians. It was a whispered voice, understood only by the initiated, but it was a powerful one. It had become an icon of a world that refused to be fully disenchanted. As the 20th century dawned, this whispered tradition began to find its way out of the secret societies and into the open air. The world was changing again. 2 devastating world wars had shattered the Victorian faith in inevitable progress. People were searching for new ways of understanding their place in the world, ways that were more connected to the earth, to the seasons, and to a sense of personal spirituality. And from this fertile, war-torn ground, new movements like modern Wicca began to grow. For these new pagans, the mandrake underwent another transformation. It was gently lifted from the complex ceremonial machinery of the Golden Dawn and replanted into the wilder soil of folk magic and nature worship. If the Victorian magicians saw the mandrake as a precise tool, the 20th century witch saw it as a wise and powerful elder, a spirit of the land itself. The focus shifted from dominion to communion. The root's human form was now seen as a beautiful and direct representation of the god and goddess, the divine masculine and feminine principles that are at the heart of many pagan beliefs. A forked root could be a lord of the wild, a figure like Cernunnos or Pan. A less distinctly forked root could be a Gaia figure, an earth mother. It was a sacred vessel, a fetish in the original sense of the word, an object believed to house a spirit. It was used in healing spells, not because of a misunderstanding of its chemistry, but because its spirit was believed to promote vitality and wholeness. It was a powerful component in love magic, its human shape symbolizing the union of two people. It was a guardian, placed in the home to ward off evil, its slumbering power a silent watchman. The scream was still there, a part of its deep folklore, a reminder of its potency, but it was now understood less as a literal, physical danger and more as a spiritual one. To harvest a mandrake without respect, without leaving an offering, without asking its permission, was to upset the balance of nature. The scream was the cry of a wounded ecosystem, a spiritual warning against human arrogance. In this new context, the plant's psychoactive properties were also seen in a different light. They weren't for communing with complex angelic hierarchies, but for what is sometimes called hedge riding, a shamanic journey into the other world, a flight of the soul to commune with the spirits of the land, the ancestors, the fae. The mandrake was a key, yes, but not to a celestial palace. It was a key to the overgrown gate at the bottom of the garden, the one leading into the wild, dreaming heart of nature itself. And so, for decades, the mandrake lived on in this way, a quiet but persistent life in the world of the occult, in the herb gardens of Wiccans, in the pages of niche publications. It was a secret known to a few, a piece of living folklore, a potent plant spirit waiting patiently in the earth. The wider world, the world of science and commerce and television, had largely forgotten its name. It seemed destined to be a beautiful, strange relic of a bygone age. But the human imagination is a vast and interconnected root system, much like the mycelial network that connects the trees in a forest, and ideas that go dormant in one area can suddenly and explosively fruit in another. And that is exactly what happened to the mandrake. The rich, dark soil of occultism and folklore had kept its story alive, and now it was about to be discovered by a new kind of storyteller. It began subtly, in the world of fantasy gaming. In the 1970s and 80s, games like Dungeons and Dragons created a new kind of mythology. They were vast encyclopedias of monsters, spells, and magic items drawn from every corner of world folklore. And in those manuals, among the dragons and elves, the mandrake root appeared. It was codified, given rules, it became an ingredient, a component for a potion of heroism perhaps, or a necessary item to cure a magical curse. The scream was now a game mechanic. If you failed your saving throw, your character was stunned for a number of rounds. The ancient terror was translated into the cool, rational language of statistics. Then came video games. As technology evolved, players could leave the tabletop and enter vast digital worlds. In games like The Witcher or the Elder Scrolls series, you could become the hero yourself, walking through a virtual forest. And you could look down, and there it would be, a strange little plant. You could harvest it. The scream might manifest as a flash of light on the screen, a disorienting sound effect, a temporary drain on your health bar. For millions of people, this was their first encounter with the mandrake. They were performing a digital echo of an ancient ritual, becoming the medieval herb gatherer, the Victorian magician, the modern witch, all for the purpose of crafting a digital potion. The mandrake had been reborn as a collectible, a resource. Each of these steps brought the mandrake further out of the esoteric shadows and closer to the mainstream. It was being prepared, repotted, acclimated to a new environment. And then, at the turn of the millennium, it found the most fertile soil imaginable. It found a greenhouse at a school of witchcraft and wizardry. When J.K. Rowling introduced the mandrake in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, it was a moment of pure genius. She took all the disparate ancient threads of the legend and wove them into a single, unforgettable image. She didn't have to invent anything new. She simply had to be the perfect curator of the old. First, the visual. She didn't just describe a root that looked human-like. She gave us a living, breathing, ugly little baby. The text describes them as tufty purplish green, and the movie visuals brought this to life with breathtaking perfection. They were grumpy, They were squirming. They were undeniably alive. This masterstroke transformed the mandrake from a strange-looking root into a character. It was an organism that bridged the plant and animal kingdoms in a way that felt both magical and strangely plausible within the rules of her world. Second, the scream. Rowling put the scream front and center. It wasn't just a folk tale, it was a core testable feature of the plant's biology, and it was lethal. This raised the stakes immensely. It required a specific piece of magical equipment, the earmuffs, to handle them safely. The scene in Professor Sprout's greenhouse is a masterclass in world building. It's funny, it's charming, and it's genuinely dangerous. It took the most dramatic element of the plant's 1,000-year-old story and made it the headline. And third, the context. By placing the mandrakes in a herbology class, she did something truly revolutionary. She domesticated the terror. This ancient, feared magical entity, sought by sorcerers and alchemists, was now a school lesson. It was part of a curriculum. Repotting a mandrake was a homework assignment. This brilliant juxtaposition made the magical world feel solid, lived in, and relatable. The students, in their boredom and apprehension, were just like us. This act of placing the fantastical into a mundane context is what made her world feel so real, and it allowed the mandrake to be embraced by a global audience of children and adults. The mandrake from Harry Potter is now, for billions of people, the definitive mandrake. It is the image that comes to mind. Rowling took a story that had been whispered for millennia, a story that had survived the fall of Rome, the plagues of the Middle Ages, the skepticism of the Enlightenment, and the secret rituals of the Victorians, and she broadcast it to the entire planet. The scream, once heard only by those who dared to seek it out in forbidden texts, was now echoing in movie theaters and in the imaginations of children in every country on Earth. And so our journey comes full circle. From a real, humble, and powerfully medicinal plant growing quietly in the Mediterranean soil, to a demon spirit in a medieval manuscript. From a key to unlocking the secrets of creation in an alchemist's lab, to a tool of vision for a modern witch, and finally, to a grumpy screaming baby in a pot at Hogwarts. The plant itself, Mandragora Officinarum, has remained unchanged. It has spent these last few thousand years doing exactly what it has always done, patiently converting sunlight into sugar, drawing water from the soil, and manufacturing its complex and potent alkaloids. It is entirely unconcerned with our stories, our fears, and our magic. It has no scream to give. It is a silent, brilliant chemist, a master of survival. But we have never stopped telling its story. We have never stopped seeing our own reflection in its forked root. We see in it our connection to the earth, our fear of death, our hope for magic, our desire for transformation. The Mandrake story is a mirror, reflecting our changing relationship with the natural world. When we feared nature, we saw the plant as a demon. When we sought to control it, we saw it as a tool. And now, in an age where so many of us feel disconnected from the earth, we have reimagined it as a piece of wonder, a living embodiment of the magic that we sense still exists in the world, just beyond the reach of our everyday lives. The scream of the mandrake, in the end, was never coming from the plant. It was coming from us. It is the scream of awe in the face of a nature that is both beautiful and dangerous. It is the cry of wonder at a plant that looks impossibly, miraculously like us. It is the sound of our own deep, instinctual, and unbreakable connection to the green, living world. So the next time you think of that screaming root, perhaps dim the lights, find that perfect spot on your pillow, and listen past the mythical cry. Listen deeper. Listen to the quiet, patient, brilliant chemistry unfolding within its cells. Listen to the 1,000-year-old story that we have told about it. Because the true magic of the mandrake is not in its scream. It is in our incredible, enduring need to listen for one. And that, in its own way, is the most powerful enchantment of all.